Hey guys, tonight we are going back to the glittering crossroads of the ancient Mediterranean Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE, a time when torchlight unpolished marble guided scholars and sailors alike across cultures and seas. Before you get comfortable, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps small creators like us keep bringing you more calming, soft-spoken narration to help with sleep. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see this sleepy little community gather from every corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, slow your breathing, and relax your body as we drift into a world where the first blush of dawn kisses the mighty lighthouse of Pharos, and the hush of pre-dawn Alexandria becomes your gentle sleep aid. A silvery mist still clings to the wind-dark sea as the horizon melts from midnight violet to the faintest petal pink. Somewhere far to the east, the sun has only begun its climb, yet the tall white column of the Pharos already commands the twilight. Its tiered stone body rises like a tranquil titan at the harbor mouth, lantern chamber still aglow with fading embers from the night's guiding flame. A salty whisper rides the breeze-soft shushes of wave crests brushing the breakwater, gulls wheeling in languid arcs overhead. In this blue-gray hour, before the city's heartbeat quickens, every sound feels padded, every color muted, as though the universe itself knows it must tread lightly so as not to wake the dreaming scrolls that slumber on the shelves nearby. Our quiet viewpoint drifts upon the deck of a slender merchant vessel easing toward the eastern harbor. Oars no longer churn. Sailors speak only in low murmurs, while the helmsman cranes his neck to gauge the lighthouse's beacon, that celestial eye which has shepherded countless keels through reef and shoal. Behind us, crates of incense, Cypriot copper, and rolls of fine papyrus exhale sweet notes of myrrh and cedar into the damp air. Ahead, the city unfurls a pale silhouette of colonnades, flat-roofed houses, and distant garden terraces, all veiled beneath the thinning night. Somewhere, a lyre finds a tentative chord, testing its tune like a bird sensing dawn's first warmth. The entire tableau holds its breath, suspended between yesterday's shadows and today's promise. Closer now, the lighthouse's stone guard lions emerge, their carved manes slick with dew. Above them, soot-smudged keepers in linen tunics douse the beacon's brazier, scraping coals into a bronze basin with practiced care. The tower's square base gives way to an octagonal midsection banded by narrow windows, each reflecting the swelling colors of sunrise. Highest of all, the cylindrical lantern, once crowned by a statue of Zeus' arm outstretched with thunderbolt, now stands bare, yet dignified, an unspoken pledge that knowledge, like this guiding light, will outlast the night. A mirrored disk within the chamber gathers the last embers and flings them westward in golden shards that flicker across our hull. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the low, steady breathing of the structure itself's stone warming, timbers creaking, iron chains rattling softly as though the lighthouse too is living, waking, stretching. We glide past massive granite breakwaters lined with Rhodian marble statues, a horse rearing in eternal salute, a dolphin twisting midly up, and a hooded priestess whose eyes seem to follow every prow. Fishermen sit cross-legged along the quay, patching nets by lamplight, their fingers moving with silent, meditative rhythm. One raises a hand in greeting, yet even his shout seems swallowed by the dawn hush, emerging only as a gentle wave. High above, seaborne breezes billow crimson sails hung from cedar masts, sighing through rigging like distant lullabies. The harbor water lies glassy, mirroring the pharaohs so perfectly that the tower appears twice, once in white marble, once in shimmering liquid slate, two serene sentinels bracketing the entrance to a city of learning. Beyond the docklands, Alexandria itself slowly stirs. The canopic Wather, grand east-west avenue, remains mostly empty, saved for street sweepers whose straw brushes whisper against mosaic pavements. In shaded porticos, olive oil lamps gutter out one by one as vendors lift wicker shutters in preparation for the day's market. From a rooftop apiary comes the faint drone of bees rousing damp wings, eager to taste the city's morning blooms, jasmine, lotus, and shy pink roses that climb marble balustrades. Yet even now, shadows linger in peristyle gardens, where statues of Athena and Serapis stand half-cloaked in night's final veil. The hush is so complete that a lone droplet, left from irrigation, can be heard plinking into a terracotta basin, echoing like a solitary chime within a cathedral. Follow a side street, veined with crushed shell gravel, and you'll find the bakery district. Here, as pale gold light leaks between pillars, the first loaves emerge from clay beehive ovens. Steam coils upward, carrying aromas of anise, honey, and warm barley, wrapping the neighborhood in a soft, edible blanket. Bakers speak in soft staccato, timing kneads to the rhythm of their breath, careful not to disturb the tranquil spell. Nearby, a dawning chorus of doves resonates from sanctuary eaves, their coos melting seamlessly into the hush of the awakening cityscape. Each mundane action, the slosh of water in a wooden trough, the dull thud of dough upon a marble slab, becomes its own gentle percussion, underscoring the symphony of calm. Toward the city's heart rises the museum precinct, a sprawling complex of columned walkways and cypress-lined courtyards. Inside a lofty hall, scholars in linen hamations huddle over low tables strewn with styluses and wax tablets. Oil lamps still flicker here. It will be hours before Helios climbs high enough to flood the reading rooms with natural light, and so gentle flames continue their silent duty. One philosopher murmurs a stanza of Homer, rolling the dactylic hexameter across his tongue like a lullaby. Another grinds malachite into ink, the stone's hushed rasp matching his unhurried pulse. Caged songbirds, kept for study of avian migratory patterns, trill uncertain notes that ripple through the colonnade like ripples across a pond. All is scholarly poise, but beneath the calm lies electric expectation. Another day of discovery ready to bloom. At the library proper, cedar doors carved with ivy motifs stand ajar, exhaling the dry, unmistakable perfume of papyrus, aged by salt air and centuries of thought. Cat-sleek guardians against gnawing mice slip inside and vanish among towering cell racks. Junior scribes, barely older than pages they copy, collect armfuls of rolled texts left to air overnight in breezy clerestories. They step lightly, mindful that even their sandals slap upon the marble might awaken fragile inks. Elsewhere, in a quiet annex, the chief grammarian reclines upon a cushioned couch, eyes half closed, tracing the first faint rays filtering across a wall mosaic of the muses. He inhales deeply, as if drawing the very essence of dawn into his lungs, and exhales a silent vow to shield this trove of human memory from the ravages of time. Outside, the Pharos' mirror catches the fully risen sun at last, and flicks a blade of brilliance across the water, striking the bronze prows of distant ships until they sparkle like stars come to rest upon the waves. Market criers clear their throats. Sandal makers test harpstring tension on their leather straps. A boy lowers a bucket into a public fountain, and the splash rings bright as a temple bell. Yet even as the city's tempo escalates, a residue of pre-dawn serenity lingers, clinging to colonnades and drifting through sycamore leaves in gentle sighs. It is as though Alexandria herself carries within her stone sinews a built-in memory of quietude, a remembrance of the hush that precedes illumination, the still breath that gathers before the first whispered syllable of wisdom is spoken aloud. So, dear listener, nestle deeper beneath your covers, and let the afterglow of this tranquil sunrise bathe your mind. Imagine the distant crackle of extinguished beacon coals, the rustle of papyrus as silent librarians ready their treasures, the muted hum of a city gently unfolding like a lotus beneath a warming sun. Hold this calm within you, knowing that every great saga begins with a single dawn, the hush-filled moment when possibilities hover like gulls in the early light, wings outstretched, waiting to glide upon the promise of day. Rest easy, for our voyage through Alexandria's grand story has only just begun, and the gentle tide of history will carry us steadily, softly onward. The hush of dawn still lingers when we step backward in time to 331 BCE, the year a young Macedonian king, fresh from triumph at Gaugamela I, set foot on a windswept ribbon of sand between Lake Moreotis and the open Mediterranean. Alexander, cloak billowing like a seabird's wing, pauses on the low dunes as gulls wheel overhead, their cries softened by the morning fog. Before him stretches a natural causeway called the Heptastadion, linking the island of Pharos to the mainland. The water shimmers a muted pewter, broken only by lazy ripples and the distant silhouettes of reed-thatched skiffs gliding over the lagoon. Beside Alexander stands his favored architect, Dinocrates of Rhodes, holding a rolled parchment and a surveyor's measuring rod. Yet in this moment no map can rival the scroll of possibility unfurling in the king's mind. A cosmopolitan harbor where knowledge, trade, and legend converge like gentle currents, forever changing the world's intellectual tide. Alexander's fascination with founding cities is often chalked up to strategy way stations for his armies, loyal enclaves seated across a restless empire. Yet there is a more intimate ember glowing beneath the marble. As a boy, he devoured Homer by lamplight, tracing Odysseus' voyages with an eager finger and dreaming of his own beacon cities dotting an endless sea. His tutor, Aristotle, had fanned those dreams, describing how settlements thrive when philosophy and commerce share a single hearth. Now, as he watches the first sunspears dance upon Moreotis' quiet surface, Alexander tastes the same electric certainty he felt scaling the battlements of Tyre, that a place can be willed into greatness if its story is told with enough conviction. His heartbeat slows the warrior's pulse, surrendering to a philosopher's cadence while low waves murmur, like library pages turned by an invisible breeze. Only weeks earlier, at the sun-dazed oasis of Siwa, the oracle of Ammon had hailed him son of Zeus, sealing in myth what conquest alone could not. That divine whisper still clings to his thoughts, mingling with salt air and the thyme scent rising from sparse coastal brush. Alexander's gaze sweeps from the limestone bluffs of the mainland to the crescent beach of Pharos, envisioning twin harbors offering safe anchorage no matter the wind's caprice. The oracle's words promise cosmic legitimacy, but a harbor, a lighthouse, a library, these promise immortality of a quieter sort, carried not on spears but on ideas. As dew evaporates, his soldiers maintain respectful silence, sensing that even their armor should not clink loudly enough to disturb a dream being born. Dinocrates kneels and pours a sack of barley meal along the sand, outlining the first tentative streets in soft, edible lines. Tradition claims the gulls descended to peck at the grain, scattering the pattern. But Alexander smiled and deemed it a favorable omen. The city would feed nations as readily as it fed birds. He walks the improvised grid, each step measured, his sandals pressing hieroglyphs of intent into the damp earth. The architect follows, noting angles and distances, already translating the king's intuitive geometry into colonnades and courtyards. They stop at the crest of a low rise, where Lake Moreotis glints like a giant polished mirror, and Alexander draws a half-circle in the sand with the tip of his spear, the grand semicircular marketplace that will one day thrum with traders from Carthage, Cyrene, and distant Bengal. Closer to the water, fishermen mend linen nets dyed a dusty saffron by repeated sunrise bleachings. They glance up, eyes wide at the royal entourage, yet their movements remain unhurried, netting sliding through calloused fingers with the same patient rhythm as tides. One elder, cheeks creased like ancient papyrus, offers Alexander a glistening mullet as a token of welcome. The king accepts, breaking protocol to salute the man with informal warmth. This gesture, small as a pebble, ripples outward. Whispers pass among the fishing huts that the conqueror of Persia values humility, that perhaps this new city will shelter commoners as tenderly as it courts scholars. The nets fall back into place, goals settle, and the dune grass stirs like soft applause. Quarries at Tura and Mokattam soon awake to the clang of chisels. Marble blocks sliding onto greased sledges bound for the nascent shoreline by candleglow. Draft oxen haul the pale stones along temporary roads lit by oil-soaked reeds stuck into earthen sconces. Each creak of axle and groan of rope is muffled by night's gauze, turning back-breaking labor into a kind of slow, collective lullaby. Workers sing low hymns to Thoth and Hephaestus alike, believing the gods of writing and forge must collaborate if a city of wisdom is to rise. When the convoy finally reaches the water's edge, sailors lash the cargo on flat-bottomed barges that drift like moonlit islands toward Pharos' quiet parcels of future porticos, still dreaming inside their dormant veins. Foundation rites unfold beneath a sky wetted with stars. Priests in twin traditions, Egyptian leopard skins, and Macedonian white Hammatian circle fresh excavated trenches, sprinkling wine, milk, and Nile water in interlaced patterns that glint silver in torchlight. A reed flute pipes a four-note motif, repeating until it feels like the planet's own heartbeat. Alexander lowers the first cornerstone, a white marble cube veined with faint rose, while whispering a dedication to the Muses and to Amonzeus. The block settles with a sigh against rammed earth, as though relieved to begin its watch. Soldiers, lining the perimeter, dip spears in olive oil, signifying a pledge that sword and scholarship will defend one another. Far above, constellations reflect in still water, mapping a celestial mirror-mage of streets yet built, scrolls yet inked. Dinocrates' master plan unfurls along a rational Greek grid, the orthogonal bones upon which Alexandrian flesh will grow. Central is the Canopic Way, a broad boulevard stretched like a harp string from the Necropolis Gate in the west to the Canopic Gate in the east. As surveyors pace its length, they mark future colonnades where traders may walk shielded from midday glare and evening chill alike. Perpendicular streets promise breezes to flush away harbor odors, ensuring even the poorest quarter will taste Mediterranean salt mixed with lotus fragrance. Inland, near Lake Mareotis. Expansive granaries take shape, their thick adobe walls poised to cradle grain shipments that will one day soften famine as kindly as a lullaby sifts fear from restless minds. Yet Alexander insists the city must speak two languages, like a bilingual lullaby, soothing both Greek and Egyptian souls. He orders a grand temple to Isis beside a shrine to Apollo, instructing sculptors to blend papyrus and laurel motifs so seamlessly that worshippers feel no seam. At the city's intellectual heart, he envisions a Musampart sanctuary, part academy where marble busts of the 9 muses overlook sheltered walkways lined with myrtle. Nearby, living quarters for philosophers will feature private courtyards shaded by sycamores, the perfect stillness for thought or, when words fail, restorative silence. The design whispers inclusivity, Greeks debating stoically beneath painted porticos, Egyptian scribes illuminating papyrus with lapis strokes, travelers exchanging jests in Phoenician, Aramaic, or Nubian tongues, each syllable sliding peacefully into the next. When at last the first blocks of housing rise and the scent of wet mortar mingles with sea breeze, Alexander departs to chase new horizons, yet he leaves behind something more enduring than garrisons or tribute. He leaves behind anticipation, that gentle pressure in the chest when one senses a story about to be told. In quiet moments between hammer blows, masons envision scholars strolling their finished halls, sailors unloading cedar crates imagine scrolls breathing inside, washerwomen scrubbing linen along canals dream that their children might someday read words only gods now know. Over it all hangs the hush of dawn extended indefinitely, a suspended breath before the world exhales wisdom. And though Alexander will not live to see the city crowned with its lighthouse flame or library vaults, his marble dream settles into the foundation like a heartbeat, thudding softly, steadily, beneath every future footstep. The death of Alexander echoes like a fading drumbeat across the marble grid he traced, leaving his trusted General Ptolemy to cradle the newborn city like a foster father, easing a restless child into sleep. Under a lemon-pale dawn, Ptolemy stands on the half-finished quay, cloak fluttering in the salt wind, and he feels the weight of dual inheritances, Macedonian ambition and Egyptian eternity, settling across his broad shoulders. He breathes in the mingled scents of cedar planks, fresh-cut limestone, and briny algae clinging to harbor pylons, imagining how these aromas will one day merge with the dry perfume of papyrus scrolls. Whereas Alexander dreamed in heroic strokes, Ptolemy dreams in careful increments. Aqueducts that hum like river lullabies, granaries that murmur with the soft rustle of wheat, and a sanctuary of learning whose very walls pulse with the heartbeat of recorded memory. His first decree flows like a calm tide through the camp. Every stone laid must honor both Pharaonic tradition and Hellenic order, melding lotus vines with Doric flutes so seamlessly that a wandering stonemason cannot tell where Egypt ends and Greece begins. At dawn assemblies, overseers recite these instructions in hushed, rhythmic Greek, then again in melodious, demotic Egyptian, their voices low to preserve the tranquil hush of early morning. The masons answer with nods and measured hammer taps, a percussive language that speaks of patience. Columns rise with slow dignity, each shaft wrapped in damp linen to prevent cracking beneath the relentless sun. At night, apprentices slide their palms along cooling surfaces, feeling for hidden fissures, the way a caretaker checks a sleeping child for fever. Ptolemy's engineers next turn their gaze inland, toward Lake Merodasi, where a freshwater canal is envisioned to thread like an azure ribbon from the Nile Delta into the city's thirsty belly. Surveyors pace its path beneath moonlight, marking gentle gradients with bronze pegs that glint like constellations scattered across dark soil. By torchlight, laborers dig in disciplined silence, their shovels slicing earth in a soothing metronome that lulls nearby sentries into dreamy reverie. When water finally trickles into the channel carrying faint scents of silt, lotus, pollen, and distant rainstorms, Ptolemy orders a ceremonial pause. He kneels, cups a palmful of the cool flow, and lifts it skyward in gratitude to both Nilotic gods and Olympian patrons, letting the droplets bead off his fingers like crystal beads of promise. With fresh water secured, attention turns to sustenance. Vast silos, buttressed with Nile clay and capped in sun-baked limestone, sprout near the canal terminus. Ptolemy envisions these granaries as more than warehouses. They are insurance against famine, lullabies against hunger's cruel wakefulness. Each dome-roofed chamber is lined with cedar staves to deter insects, and within their shady interiors, workers tread barley and immer wheat into tidy hills that emit a mellow, nutty aroma. By decree, surplus grain will later underpin a scholar's stipend, allowing philosophers and poets to ponder without the gnaw of an empty stomach. Thus, every kernel poured into storage whispers a future footnote in a treatise or a sonnet, binding stomach and soul in peaceful accord. No structure, however, captures Ptolemy's imagination like the planned Mausiana temple to the muses and cradle for the library. He recruits Demetrius of Phaleron, an exiled Athenian statesman with the voice of a bedtime storyteller and the organizational skills of a seasoned quartermaster. Together, they pace the earmarked hillside overlooking the harbor, discussing porticos wide enough to invite sea breezes, yet sheltered enough to keep scrolls safe from mist. They picture lecture halls where echoes soften into velvet, dormitories where mathematicians drift to sleep, calculating star paths against dim ceiling frescoes, and stoas where visiting sages stroll in contemplative silence, sandals scuffing mosaic floors patterned with constellations. Each conversational turn draws the blueprint sharper, as though their very words etch grooves into the air for stonemasons to follow at dawn. Funding such grandeur demands steady streams of tribute, and Ptolemy secures them not through harsh levies, but by weaving Alexandria into existing currents of trade. He lowers harbor taxes for incoming grain ships, understanding that abundance breeds generosity. In return, captains sign contracts pledging to unload a copy of any book their vessels' passengers carry. Royal agents stand ready on the dock, issuing sleek new papyrus duplicates for travelers to keep, while original manuscripts slide reverently into linen-lined chests bound for the nascent library. Thus, the city's coffers swell with both silver talents and silver-inked knowledge to currencies equally potent in Ptolemy's quiet calculus. To house this influx, specialized scribal workshops sprout near the Mausian-like tidy orchards of intellect. Daylight filters through clear-story windows, illuminating rows of copyists hunched over cedar desks, their reeds dipping into earthenware inkwells of carbon black and rare indigo. The air resonates with gentle scratching, thousands of tiny sounds accumulating into a soft oceanic hush that rivals the distant surf. Supervisors glide between benches, correcting ligature flourishes with feather-light taps of a wax tablet, ensuring each duplicate retains the cadence of the original author's hand. Breaks are brief and hushed, a sip of diluted honey wine, a stretch of cramped fingers, then back to the rhythmic dance of letters. Outside, Pigeons coo from rooftop dovecotes, punctuating the scriptorious hum with sleepy lullaby notes. Recognizing that architecture alone cannot cradle scholarship, Ptolemy fosters a culture of serene curiosity. He invites poets like Callimachus to anchor themselves within Alexandria's walls, promising them stipends, warm baths, and rooms that overlook fragrant sycamore groves. Astronomers receive polished bronze armillary spheres, calibrated with painstaking care under lamplight, while geographers gain access to a newly commissioned model, Globit's rivers traced in lapis, mountain ranges crenellated with mica. Even physicians are pampered. Anatomical theaters boast marble slabs cooled by trickling water channels, so cadavers lie in gentle repose rather than under harsh desert heat. Ptolemy walks these halls incognito at dusk, listening to the soft cadence of debate, a sort of civic heartbeat that quickens only when insight sparks, then subsides to tranquil silence once more. Meanwhile, the lighthouse of Pharos inches heavenward across the harbor, echoing the library's ascent inland. Its square base rises first, blocks fitted so tight that a sleeping cat could not squeeze between seams. By night, builders rest on wooden platforms, suspended over dark water, lulled by wavelets kissing the foundations below. Foremen enforce a remarkable quietude. Hammers are wrapped in layered linen, chisels tipped with leather guards, all to preserve nocturnal peace for nearby fishermen and scholars burning midnight oil. In this hush, one can almost hear the stone breathe as it settles, exhaling dust motes that drift like miniature galaxies in torchlight before vanishing into the calm. At last, after seasons of steady labor, conducted with near-ritual gentleness, a dawn arrives when Alexandria seems to inhale as a single entity. The canal's waters sparkle with reflected columns, granaries stand brimful, and the half-finished Mausian already echoes with soft footfalls of arriving thinkers. From his balcony, Ptolemy watches as sunlight crawls across limestone facades, warming the pale surfaces to a hue reminiscent of unrolled parchment. He closes his eyes and envisions future nights when a weary scribe, quill paused, will gaze out at the lighthouse flame and feel anchored by its steady glow. The thought soothes him like a lullaby, for in that moment he knows his grand design is not merely stone and scroll, but the carefully woven quiet that will cradle the minds of generations yet unborn. The hush of evening settles over Alexandria like a silk veil, muting the clang of harbor chains and the chatter of market stalls until only a faint rustle of cypress branches lingers in the air. Lanterns wink out, one by one, along the canopic way, their last embers drifting upward to mingle with a crescent moon that hangs low and luminous above the Mausian's half-finished pediment. Within that gentle half-light, a caravan of shadowy figures approaches the eastern gate. Nubian porters bearing wicker crates, papyrus merchants from the delta, and a trio of royal scribes whose white linen robes glow faintly in the moonbeams. The gatekeepers recognize this procession at once. Tonight's cargo is neither spice nor silver, but priceless potential, bound in neat rolls and smelling faintly of marsh grass and fresh ink. Without a word, the watchmen swing the cedar doors aside, allowing the night's precious harvest of knowledge to flow inward like a quiet tide. Beyond the gateway, torchbearers guide the convoy along a colonnade where fluted columns catch slivers of starlight, each vertical groove shimmering like a frozen waterfall. Footsteps echo softly against the polished stone, their cadence measured so as not to jar the delicate papyrus. From overhead balconies come distant nocturnal calls, a nightingale's rolling trill, a cat's throaty yowl chasing unseen prey among rooftop tiles. Yet none of these sounds competes with the barely audible music arising from the crates themselves, the subtle crackle of reed fibers adjusting to cooler air, the whisper of scrolls brushing one another as the porters shift their grip. To the library's keepers, these murmurs are lullabies, promising fresh texts to unroll, translate, and copy beneath tomorrow's dawn. The procession pauses at the grand bronze doors of the bibliothèque, whose relief panels depict the 9 muses bestowing garlands upon mortal poets. A chief librarian, Seleucus of Cyrene, emerges from the shadows, holding a slender lamp whose flame dances behind tinted glass. He performs no dramatic welcome. Instead, he inclines his head in silent gratitude, then directs the crates toward a side entrance, where a Lifton genius, in its simplicity, awaits. Thick hemp ropes loop over cedar pulleys, allowing porters to raise the precious load to an upper gallery without jostling the fragile contents on a stair. As the crates ascend, Seleucus pages through a wax tablet, logging each merchant's name and place of origin. His stylus strokes as slow and steady as the pulleys creak. Data, after all, is the first form of care. Inside the receiving gallery, the air is redolent with a medley of calming scents. Melted beeswax from guttering candles, crushed myrtle leaves laid out to deter insects, and faint cedar exuded from the very shelving that lines the walls. Quills poised like sleepy swans upon an ink-dark lake. At Seleucus's subtle signal, the first crate is eased open, and the scrolls, removed one by one, each lifted with 2 hands as tenderly as an infant. A quick initial inspection follows sprites for mold, script for legibility, then every roll receives a parchment tag bearing its provenance, the equivalent of a whispered introduction before entering polite society. When completed, the tagged scrolls lie side by side on felt-lined trays, awaiting tomorrow's more exhaustive cataloging beneath full sunlight. While the librarians work, the Nubian porters squat nearby, sipping diluted date wine from clay cups that steam in the cool night air. Though their contract ends at delivery, they watch the handlers with reverent interest, sensing that something monumental transpires each time a scroll is unwrapped. One porter, a broad-shouldered youth with eyes reflective as dark water, reaches out to touch a stray papyrus chip on the floor. He turns it over in his palm, marveling at the ink strokes so small, yet charged with invisible power, before placing it carefully in a refuse basket reserved for even the smallest scraps. Later, those crumbs will feed the scriptorium's experimental fires that test new ink recipes, ensuring nothing in the library's orbit is wasted, not even an errant flake of knowledge. With crates emptied and porters dismissed, Seleucus extinguishes all but one lantern, plunging the gallery into a velvety penumbra. This final flame remains for one purpose only: to illuminate the ritual of humidification that keeps papyrus supple after travel. From a niche in the wall, an attendant draws a shallow marble basin already filled with Nile water scented by a sprig of blue lotus. Scrolls, destined for immediate copywork, are propped on a lattice above the basin so they can absorb gentle moisture overnight. Those slated for storage will rest in cedar drawers where controlled dryness preserves ink for decades. Within minutes, tendrils of scented vapor curl upward, wrapping each roll in an invisible embrace that mimics the marshy climate of its birth. Under that perfumed mist, papyrus fibers sigh and relax, as if stretching after a long journey. Outside the latticed windows, the harbor hum diminishes to a low hush. Ships at anchor sway in slow tandem, their oiled ropes creaking a lullaby that drifts through the Mausian's courtyards. In one distant study chamber, an elderly mathematician falls asleep over his abacus, and the faint clack of counting stones in his dream seems to echo the bobbing pontoons. The city's myriad noises converge into a single tranquil chord, vibrating in sympathy with the library's wooden rafters. Within that resonance, the scrolls appear almost alive, pulsing, gently, swelling and contracting like lungs drawing breath. Seleucus observes this quiet respiration for a long moment, then pens an evening report noting the number of new titles, their language of origin, and any immediate conservation concerns. His script, too, is a kind of breathing, regular, rhythmic, sustaining the life of a collection that now spans the known world. Close to midnight, a different team begins its vigil. The night copyists, or nyctographoi, young scholars who prefer lamplight to sunbeams. They slip into the gallery like ghosts, sandals muffled by woven rush mats. Their task is straightforward yet monumental. Produce preliminary duplicates of newly arrived works so quickly that the library can dispatch copies to satellite archives at Memphis, Pergamon, and eventually distant Antioch. Each copyist lifts a scroll from the humidifier rack, reads a few lines in near silence, then begins the transcription on a fresh sheet of finest crown brand papyruso named for the tiny reed leaf emblem watermarking each page. Quills glide with hypnotic steadiness, interrupted only by the soft dip into inkwells and the occasional controlled exhale that steadies a wrist. In this meditative labor, time seems to slow, as if the very moonlight thickens into a syrup that drips quietly down the walls. Yet it is not merely text that travels tonight. Embedded within these scrolls are entire world's Babylonian star charts, inked in angular Akkadian, playful Greek comedies whose punchlines still elicit silent smiles. Egyptian hymns to Hathor, rendered in looping hieroglyphic script that sparkles like jewelry when wet with fresh ink. As each unique voice crosses the copyist's stylus, it merges with countless others in the library's vast chorus, proof that knowledge, like water, seeks to fill every receptive vessel. The nyctographoi feel this confluence beneath their fingertips. It steadies their breathing, aligns their heartbeats, and invites a serenity that borders on the transcendent. If you could listen closely, you might hear their collective pulse, soft, steady, and synchronized with the roll of waves, outside keeping time with the growth of human understanding. Near the hour of cockcrow, the copyists complete their last lines, sprinkle a pinch of fine sand to set the ink, and place their fresh leaves beneath small bronze weights to flatten overnight. Seleucus returns to inspect the gallery one final time. He notes with quiet satisfaction the neat stacks of duplicates, the gently recoiled originals now resting in labeled cubbies, and the lingering lotus scent that drifts through half-closed shutters into the cooling air beyond. Before leaving, he performs a humble gesture taught to every librarian since Demetrius of Phaleron. He brushes his fingertips across the doorframe once for memory, once for vigilance, once for hope, then bows his head to the silent congregation of scrolls. They answer with a silence so deep it feels like a promise that dawn will find them intact, ready to unfurl new worlds beneath a kinder light. Outside, dawn's first pale brushstroke touches the horizon, tinting the eastern clouds rose gold. Yet, within the library's receiving gallery, the moon's work is done. Scrolls imported by moonlight have survived the journey from marsh reed to written wisdom, from caravan dust to cedar drawer, and they rest now between night and day, between old hands and new minds. In this fragile interval, Alexandria itself seems to pause, balanced on the cusp of revelation. And somewhere in the stillness, a single papyrus reedin, some forgotten delta marsh quivers in the early breeze, unaware that its fibers have traveled here on the breath of scholars' dreams. So too may you rest, dear listener, knowing that every quiet night invites new stories to arrive, to be cherished, and to whisper their gentle truths beneath the soft glow of moonlight. The hush of pre-dawn lingers in the colonnaded forecourt when Telemachus of Cyrene slips through the cedar doors of the library, his sandals whispering across mosaic swirls of sea-green glass. He is short, lightly bearded, and already gray at the temples, yet the eyes beneath his hood flicker with the youthful spark that fires every methodical mind. In the crook of one arm rests a wax tablet modeled with yesterday's notes. In the other he balances a reed stylus and a small brass compass, the twin instruments of a cartographer of knowledge. Around him, the silent architecture breathes. The caryatid statues exhale cool dusk air. The cedar shelving emits a faint, resinous lullaby while, high above, the clear starry stars reluctantly yield to the first blush of morning. It is the hour between dream and duty, when a librarian may shape order out of chaos before the bustle of scholars arrives to scatter the day like sparrows. Telemachus begins with a ritual as steady as any temple liturgy. He walks the outer ambulatory clockwise, tracing the perimeter of the main scroll chamber while reciting under his breath the 9 names of the Muses at each syllable. His stylus skims the wax to mark Italianine figures, to bless the work ahead. The library now shelters hundreds of thousands of rolls, and the old wooden tallies nailed above alcoves poetry, drama, medicine have grown meaningless in the swelling tide. A parchment sent from Ptolemy II commands him to tame this flood, to fashion a map so precise that a poem of Sappho or a treatise of Euclid can be plucked from the shelves as easily as an orange from a courtyard tree. Such is the genesis of the Pinaques, the tables, a grand cataloging opus that will unfurl across parchment leaves like an inland sea of careful letters. First, he needs scaffolding. Choosing an empty alcove, he instructs 2 sleepy apprentices to erect a lattice of olive wood slats against the wall, 40 cubits wide and rising halfway to the beam-shadowed ceiling. This skeleton will carry the provisional wooden tablets, each one a placeholder for a genre, an author, a lineage of knowledge. Telemachus sketches columns and rows, a tidier echo of the city's orthogonal streets, then scribes the alphabet down the left margin in steady capitals. The letters glow amber in lamplight, a backbone on which the library's vertebrae may articulate. He turns to the apprentices, voices no louder than rustling papyrus, and explains that the mind remembers best when order and beauty entwine. A place for each scroll, a scroll for each place, and a name that sings its heritage to any who listen. Cataloging, he insists, is an act of kindness and offering to future souls. To demonstrate, he selects a random roll from a pile awaiting classification. Hesiod's Works and Days, its brittle outer edge fretted by Nile humidity. He unrolls 3 columns, skimming until he finds the incipit line, Muses sing of the farmer's toil, then notes it on a fresh wax tablet. Title, incipit, genre, didactic, verse, provenance, Attica, material, papyrus, mid-quality, state of repair, moderate. Each data point settles like a feather onto the tablet. cushioning the poem's journey toward permanent lodging. When hesitance flickers in an apprentice's eyes, Telemachus calms him with a metaphor. Imagine each scroll as a weary traveler at dusk. A thorough entry is the warm bath, the roof, and the meal that let the guest rest easy. The system's genius lies not only in detail, but in hierarchy. Telemachus divides literature into distinct tables: epic, tragedy, lyric, comedy, medicine, history, rhetoric, 24 domains in all, mirroring the letters of the Greek alphabet. Within each, he nests author entries, and within those, individual works. Every author biography includes birthplace, teacher, lineage, notable pupils, and intellectual genealogy that binds minds across centuries, like a climbing vine along marble. Opposite each biography, he drafts an inventory, marking lost works with a discrete dagger symbol, so future seekers mourn efficiently. Thus, even absence is afforded a dignified seat in the grand banquet of memory. While he writes, dawn birds flutter in the window arches, their tentative chirps echoing the catalogue's careful beginnings. The apprentices soon master the rhythm: measure, note, replace. Scrolls glide across their polished desks in a subdued ballerine tips, scratching wax, beeswax cooling under breath, linen ribbons fluttering shut as volumes return to cubbies newly labeled with cedar plaques. Yet Telemachus senses that numbers alone cannot cradle a living corpus. He introduces colored twine: crimson for poetry, indigo for science, saffron for philosophy. A glance at a shelf now reveals a gentle rainbow, a visual lullaby to calm the frantic searcher. In quiet delight, he realizes he is painting with silence pigments of order brushed across a canvas of centuries. The library itself seems to exhale relief, timbers relaxing, as though unburdened of a secret chaos it has long concealed. Mid-morning brings the scholars. They drift in wearing loose hematians and soft leather sandals, clutching wax tablets, still fragrant with fresh resin. Conversation remains hushed, as if the building's newfound symmetry demands reverence. A rhetorician inquires, after a lost speech, of Lysias. An astronomer seeks Hipparchus' early star lists. Telemachus gestures to freshly lettered plaques, and the seekers locate their quarry within moments, eyes widening at the ease. Word spreads like the scent of baking bread. The library has grown lucid. By noon, a quiet queue forms beside Telemachus' desk. Requests for guidance, offers of thanks, occasional nervous jokes that the librarian has tamed the hydra. He meets each with a modest nod, though inside he savors the gentle thrill that accompanies any well-calibrated machine's first effortless spin. Yet the task is eternal. After the scholars depart for the midday meal, Telemachus returns to the stacks, armed with new tablets. A crate from Cyprus has arrived bearing treatises on metallurgical furnaces. A sailor's chest hides Phoenician navigation chants. He unrolls, notes, assigns, binds each action a heartbeat. In an alcove, he stores fragments too damaged to shelve, dubbing it the ward of silences, where broken voices sleep until restoration revives them. He places a small clay oil lamp on the ledge, its flame perpetually lit, a vigil for the half-lost. The apprentices observe, and without instruction, they bow their heads briefly, a ritual born in the moment, honoring absence with luminous calm. As afternoon light slants amber through high windows, Telemachus drafts the Pinake's prologue. He writes that a library is a city of thought, and a catalogue its map. Without the latter, wanderers perish in labyrinthine streets. He invokes both Hermes Trismegistus and the god Thoth, patrons of scribes. begging that each reader, guided by these tables, find safe passage to wisdom's hearth. He signs with a flourish. Only he can read an intertwined alpha and omega, shaped like a sleeping cat, homage to the silent guardians who stalk the corridors at night. The fresh ink gleams, then dulls, settling into permanence like a gently closed lid over a dreaming eye. Dusk again drapes the library, drawing long lavender shadows across the vine-like maze of shelving. Before departing, Telemachus performs his clockwise circuit in reverse, this time naming daughters of Mnemosyne backward, returning gratitude to its source. The colonnades echo with the faint tap of his stylus on marble 9 times, softer than a heartbeat, closing the day's ledger. Outside, the first evening star kindles above the lighthouse flame, twin beacons guiding sailors and scholars alike. Telemachus pauses on the threshold, inhaling the mingled aromas of ink, cedar, and sea spray, and knows contentedly that within these walls every sentence now sleeps in its proper bed, the great library breathing slow, even breath-set, least until dawn summons the next wave of restless words. The quicksilver hour, between sunset and full dark, settles over Alexandria like a gentle hush, turning marble colonnades to muted lilac and coaxing fig-leaf shadows to unfurl across the library's outer walls. From the harbor, the lighthouse flame bursts into steady bloom, its beam sweeping a slow, protective arc across rippling water before glancing the bronze fittings of the library's great cedar doors. Here, at this threshold, where salt-tinged night meets ink-scented sanctuary, the evening watch gathers. 6 guardians in soft linen cuirasses file soundlessly onto the portico, each carrying a slender willow staff capped with a polished brass ferrule. No trumpets mark the change of guard. Instead, a single bronze wind gong chimes once, its rounded tone diffusing into every courtyard like a calming breath. Under that resonant hush, the day custodians' robes, fringed with silver thread exchange, quiet nods with their dusk-robed counterparts, as though handing a precious infant from one cradle of careful arms to another. The new guardians begin a clockwise circuit, sandals whispering over tessellated floors whose tesserae gleam like moonlit surf. At predictable intervals, they pause to stroke their fingers across carved doorframes, a ritual of tactile memory, ensuring muscle and would remain intimately acquainted. Each door bears a shallow notch where scroll thieves once attempted entry decades earlier. Running a thumb along that scar recalls the vigilance hard-won. In the outer alcoves, prowling cats join the patrol, tails held tall and proud, eyes shining citrine in torch glow. The guardians welcome their silent companions with minute bows. Cats here are colleagues, living sentinels against nibbling mice and intrusive moths. Where feline pads cannot tread above the lintels, along the cornice beams geckos flicker, chalk-pale specters devouring errant gnats. Thus, a living perimeter of claw, tooth, and watchful gaze seals the repository more securely than iron bars could ever hope. Inside the main scroll chamber, flamekeepers replace sputtering oil lamps with freshly trimmed wicks, whose glow deepens the room's honey-amber aura. Overhead, cedar rafters carry the faintest perfume of resin warmed by heat, a scent that has come to mean rest to every scholar who lingers past twilight. Rows upon rows of pigeonhole niches stretch into velvet gloom, each cubby labeled in the crisp hand of Callimachus's apprentices, crimson twine denoting poetry, indigo declaring science, saffron whispering philosophy. Between those colorful ribbons float motes of dust stirring in languid eddies. When a guardian's passing foot disturbs the floor, they twirl like galaxies in miniature, forming slow spirals that rise, swirl, and settle again in a silent cosmic waltz. Further within, night scribes, known as the lamb-bearers, settle at low cedar desks, lighting tiered candelabra whose flames flicker in mirrored trays to double the illumination without doubling smoke. Each scribe dons a headband of softly tanned deerskin, fitted with an owl wing quilla, whimsical badge of office, reminding them to see keenly through darkness. They unroll parchment outlines left by day copyists. Then, to preserve hush, they tip fine sand into shallow trays for absorbing excess ink rather than blotting with noisy rags. The only audible rhythm becomes a soft sequence of scratch, pause, breath, scratch, pause, breath, until the chamber's acoustic profile resembles a far-off shoreline where tiny waves caress an unbroken beach. Guardians drifting past the scriptorium slow their pace, savoring the calming cadence the way a sailor savors the first sight of morning stars. Security here is more than vigilance against theft. It is an art of safeguarding serenity. At each gallery entrance stands a low marble plinth bearing a water clock. Before the hourglass throat drains, the nearest guardian opens a tiny bronze valve, letting a measured trickle refill the basin while reciting a stanza from the Delphic maxims beneath his breath. These clock poems mark time without clang or clangor, allowing scholars lost in their scrolls to sense evening's glide in the faint burble of water rather than the jarring strike of a gong. Should an errant visitor raise a voice above soft speech, a guardian simply lifts his staff to touch the rim of a suspended copper disc. The lightest tap produces a mellow, rounding tone, neither rebuke nor bark, but a reminder that every word within these walls must fall like silk. Cats perform their rounds too. One coal-black Tom, named Carax, rumored to be on his fourth library generation, leaps onto a mezzanine ledge where cedar draws house fragile papyri from distant Bactria. He noses each latch, confirming none have been disturbed, then curls into a sphinx-like loaf, his tail flicking in time to the scribe's quills. Guardians respect his chosen perch, altering their patrol path so as not to break his survey. In another aisle, a tortoiseshell queen named Melita glides along the baseboards, ears swiveling for the faint scritch of beetle wing. When she pounces, her body barely rustles. Still, a nearby guardian softly praises her catch, stroking the cat's ear before depositing the spent insect into a covered brass brazier, whose gentle heat both disposes of pests and perfumes the air with a faint note of myrrh. Collaboration between species here is seamless, each small partnership woven into a larger tapestry of tranquility. On rare occasions, an emergency ripples the calm. Tonight, an elderly philosopher drops a stylus that clatters across limestone and disappears between scroll racks. The sharp echo freezes Lambearer's mid-stroke, but before tension can ignite, a guardian materializes, staff held horizontally as if carrying an invisible tray of still water. He bends, retrieves the rogue stylus, and offers it back with a two-finger salute, so precise it resembles choreography. The philosopher bows his head, whispering gratitude. The guardian bows deeper hierarchy, inverted in deference to wisdom, and the room's equilibrium restores itself like a pond, smoothing after a skipped stone. Such minor rescues occur nightly, tiny fractures and their gentle mendings, each leaving behind a subtler, stronger hush. Hours slide onward, lubricated by lamplight and low heartbeats. In a secluded alcove, a guardian unrolls a palm-sized codex, humming soundlessly as he reviews a roster penned by Telemachus himself. Every watch route, torch station, and feline coop tabulated in tidy columns. Inked beside each entry lies a proverb: knowledge is a flame, vigilance the oil, serving as both manual and mantra. The guardian traces these words with reverent forefinger, then signs his name beneath the night's shift, sealing the page with a dab of beeswax impressed by a signet of intertwined keys. That wax cools quickly in the chamber's chill, locking the record with a decisive finality akin to drawing closed a silk curtain. Well past midnight, the air cools toward dawn, and columns sweat faint beads of condensation that slide down to wet the limestone flooring. Guardians pace a final circuit, testing locks, lowering wick heights to conserve oil, murmuring gentle encouragement to the cats now drifting toward their lairs. A hush deeper than sleep itself blankets the library. The only motion is the stationary sway of suspended incense burners, responding to each guardian's careful footfall. In that enveloping stillness, time seems to dilate. One can imagine centuries of nights just like this, stacking upon one another, scrolls multiplying, quills wearing down, cats living out 9 lives upon 9 lives, while unbroken lines of human custodians groove the same quiet paths. At last, the faintest choral line splits the horizon beyond the portico balustrade. The guardians converge in the vestibule, staves crossed lightly over their chests in an honor knot. They lift the wingong's hammer and stroke the metal once. The resulting tone is softer than the previous evening's, richer, rounder, like the final sigh of a lullaby signaling the city. That night has performed its duty, and morning now bears the torch. The day shift receives the keys, finds the records sealed, and inhales the lingering perfume of myrrh, lotus, and faint cedar smoke. Inside, the lamp-bearers snuff their candles, rub sleep-prickled eyes, and smile at fresh pages drying flat under bronze weights. Cats thread between polished sandals, accepting dawn's caress as though it were prepared solely for their fur. The guardians of the night exit into the paling streets, cloaks drawn against pre-dawn chill, hearts slowing in tandem with the receding stars. Behind them, the library exhales a serene, satisfied breath, every scroll secure, every corridor calm, ready to welcome the new day's seekers into its carefully guarded dream of knowledge. The library's vast silence had always sounded to Hypatia like a living breath, a slow, rhythmic inhalation rising through cedar rafters and out again along colonnades. And on this lavender dawn morning she arrived early enough to hear the first faint exhale. She stepped through the eastern portico with sandals still wet from dew, her white himatayan hooded against the crisp sea breeze that rode in before sunrise, carrying gull cries and the alkaline temps of salt. In her arms she cradled a wicker case of polished bronze instruments, stastrolabe, plane table, and a thin ivory rule engraved with concentric circles that clinked softly as she moved, each delicate sound answered by distant cat paws pattering across mosaic floors. Lamps were being trimmed deeper inside, their small flames flickering like the halos of patient votives. Against that trembling light, Hypatia's shadow stretched long and regal, a quiet statement that women, too, could stride these corridors as architects of knowledge, rather than furtive visitors to its fringes. She paused, fingers brushing the familiar knot on the doorframe carved in the shape of intertwined serpents, and offered a prayer half to Athena, half to the nameless spirits of restless questions, that today's scholarly voyage would be kind to every seeker who crossed her path. Tradition said the hour before sunrise belonged to the guardians, yet this morning's hush welcomed her as conspirator rather than intruder. Nearby, An attendant named Chione knelt by a bronze basin, coaxing steam from rose-petal water meant to soften new papyrus. Seeing Hypatia, she smiled and dipped her head, curls escaping a linen kerchief. Chione would later copy astronomical notes in an elegant, slanted hand, but now she simply murmured, "May the sky tonight show the paths you plot," a benediction that floated up with the fragrant vapor and vanished into the rafters like invisible incense. In the mathematics hall, low benches ringed a circular stone dais, where lamp-bearers were setting out wax tablets, a glowness of Thessaly older than Hypatia by perhaps 20 winters. Her hair bound with a faded violet ribbon stood beside a copper armillary sphere, calibrating its nested rings against a star chart drawn from Mesopotamian sources. Rumor claimed Aglonis could call down lunar eclipses at will. In truth, she merely read celestial schedules with formidable accuracy, yet the myth lent her presence an otherworldly hush that stilled even the scrape of sandals. When Hypatia approached, the elder scholar tilted the sphere, aligning brass meridians with practiced grace, and whispered, "If men believe we sway the moon, let us sway their certainty toward wonder." The two women exchanged a knowing smile, more covenant than greeting, and began discussing the subtle wobble of the ecliptic, as though it were a lullaby meant to settle cosmic restlessness. As dawn's first gold spilled through clear-story windows, the marble floor warmed underfoot, and a procession of young students arrived, robes fluttering like shy moths. Among them was Philostrate, a teenage scribe whose fingers bore fresh quill-ink stains, and whose eyes carried a familiar hunger for recognition. She lingered near the doorway, hesitant. Hypatia beckoned her forward, unfolding a large parchment map of constellations. "Trace the river of Eridanus," she instructed gently, placing a slim stylus into Philostrate's uncertain hand. Together they followed the star path across the parchment, Hypatia's steady guidance smoothing the girl's tremor until ink flowed unbroken, a dark ribbon upon pale fiber. Quiet applause rustled from the benches, not the brash clapping of public tribunals, but the soft thrum of collective encouragement, a maternal pulse that coaxed courage from shy hearts. Elsewhere in the library, another woman orchestrated Order Theognostes, master of the Phylarch archive, whose memory was said to hold more names than a census tablet. She moved through scroll racks, accompanied by Melita, the tortoiseshell cat, who balanced on her shoulder like a living epaulette. With swift, silent gestures, she directed attendants to shelve new duplicates of Hippocratic treatises beneath saffron twine, her eyes flicking from label to label with predatory precision. When a male physician from Cyrene inquired too brusquely for the women's section, Theognostes lifted one eyebrow and responded in measured tones that all knowledge slept side by side, unsegregated, and that any scroll he might require would gladly share its wisdom with a respectful reader. The physician blushed, murmured an apology, and allowed her to escort him to a case where obstetric papyri nestled beside surgical notes on arrow wounds, proving scholarship recognized no partitions, bracknized no polishins, recovered, prochins, need, denede. By late morning, the mathematics hall had become a quiet hive. Wax tablets filled with geometric diagrams lay cooling on shallow sand trays. Astrolabe plates clicked softly beneath inquisitive fingertips, and in the far corner, Aglonis recited Sappho's fragments to illustrate the harmony between poetic meter and planetary periods. Hypatia, standing at the center, drew lines of luminous chalk across a black basalt slate, demonstrating the conic section circle, ellipse, parabola, hyperbolete shape, blooming like a white-petaled flower against night sky stone. Her voice, low and measured, described how these curves guided the orbits of wandering stars and the paths of thrown javelins alike, binding heavens and earth in a single gentle sweep. Students leaned forward, breaths held, even the flame tips stilled, as if hearing new constellations whispered into existence. Outside, noon sun flashed across the Pharos mirror and slanted through open shutters, painting slivers of brilliance across the hall's polished floor. Hypatia called for respite. Thin barley cakes, figs split to reveal ruby seeds, and clay jugs of chilled water perfumed with mint. The scholars formed a semicircle beneath a breezy portico where the garden's citrus blossoms lounged in their own fragrance. Rather than retire, Hypatia gathered them into quiet discussion about Euclid's fifth postulate, encouraging questions to flow like water over smooth stones, never to erode dignity, but to polish understanding. When a timid voice asked whether infinite parallel lines could exist in reality, Hypatia guided a hand through a sunbeam, scattering dust motes. Infinity, she murmured, is felt in the smallest particle dancing beyond our grasp. The answer settled over the group like a warm shawl, and the students ate their meal in contemplative silence, broken only by distant gulls. That afternoon, Theognostes escorted a delegation of Nubian translators to the scriptorium, where Chione had prepared a study of lunar cycles recorded on astraca shards. Their conversation, held in a braided mix of Greek, Demotic, and Meroitic, unfolded like a quiet symphony of mutual respect. Each time language threatened to snag, Theognostes smoothed it with a patient paraphrase, while Chione traced symbols on a wax tablet so translation could leap the gap with certainty. Watching nearby, Hypatia felt a swell of pride. The library's true strength lay not only in scrolls, but in these living bridges of comprehension, women who shaped silence into passageways as deftly as stonecutters carved doorways through marble. Twilight deepened, and together the women of wisdom converged on the rooftop terrace overlooking the harbor. The lighthouse lens blazed to life, a steady amber pulse mirrored in Hypatia's polished astrolabe. One by one, their students joined them, cloaks drawn against the cool breeze that carried hyacinth notes from distant gardens. Hypatia set the instrument on its stand, its bronze frame catching the last rose gold of sunset, and invited Aglonis to predict the rise of Jupiter. With practiced flourish, the elder tilted the reticle. Gasps rose as the planet winked above the velvet horizon, precisely where she foretold. Lamps remained unlit, so eyes could drink the dark, and the terrace filled with hushed exclamations every time a star flared into view. No sermon was needed. The sky preached its boundless sermon in pinpoints of light, while below, women and men together felt themselves part of a constellation, not etched on any chart, the living map of minds circling a shared center of wonder. When night finally wrapped the city in indigo silk, Hypatia dismissed her pupils with blessings whispered like lullabies, each name spoken as though etched upon the firmament itself. She lingered on the terrace beside her sisters in scholarship, watching torches bob along the canopic way and listening to distant oars slap gentle rhythms against velvet water. They spoke little. Kinship required no excess words. Instead, they let silence settle, a fertile ground where tomorrow's questions would take root. Somewhere below, Theognostus's archivists slotted the day's new scrolls into place, and Chione's rosewater basin cooled in shadow, waiting for dawn. The hush of Predon drapes the harbor like gauze. When Sostratus of Cnidus ascends the unfinished scaffolding of the Pharos, lantern in one hand, and a linen scroll of measurements in the other. The sea wind teasing stray curls of hair against his cheek, directly across the water. The library's pale colonnades glow with candlelight left, burning from a night of feverish copying, each tiny flame mirrored in the polished obsidian water between. From this height, the two rising giants of Alexandria Tower and libraries seem to breathe in unison, one of stone and fire, the other of cedar and ink, and Sostratus whispers a silent greeting to his distant counterpart. "Good morning, keeper of words." He turns to his crew craftsmen, wrapped in wool against the briny chill, and speaks in tones low enough to preserve the fragile calm. Their task at this hour is delicate, fitting the next ring of limestone blocks around the octagonal midsection, each slab hoisted by counterweighted cranes whose pulleys groan like drowsy oxen, while ropes glide and blocks settle. Sostratus paces the circumference, checking plumb lines that sway ever so slightly in the salt breeze. Each faint oscillation is a heartbeat of the tower, and he times his own breaths to their rhythmic swing, training his body to the Ferris's pulse the way a musician attunes to drum and lyre. Far below, harbor fishermen glimpse the ghostly silhouette of scaffolding and murmur superstitions. Some say the tower will stand so tall it can speak with the gods. Others that its mirror will capture sunlight and hurl it like a spear clear to roads, and like a spear clear to road. But for now it is only a child, learning the steady cadence of growth, of go with it. A by of bit, so of grow is so of so panto you to give of I will but you bet to it us to you it but you will it could be tough but you've got you up of top died will I'm scholar if I did to die Across the causeway, morning service in the Mausian begins with the soft strike of a copper gong, calling librarians and visiting scholars to the peristyle garden where dew collects on lotus petals like tiny crystal scrolls. Callimachus, still flushed from a restless night spent polishing the pineaches, exchanges a nod with Theognostes as they guide a procession of new recruits toward the central hall, each apprentice carrying a cedar tray stacked with freshly duplicated scrolls. The corridor smells of warm resin, beeswax, and the faintest trace of salt air sneaking through lattice windows, minders that the tower's stone heart and the library's papyrus veins share the same ocean breath. While Sostratus measures limestone, Callimachus measures knowledge, carving mental archways so seekers may cross from ignorance into illumination as effortlessly as sailors pass from open sea into the Ferris's safe embrace. By mid-morning, sunlight leaps from the water's surface into the raw stone ribs of the lighthouse, scattering shards of brilliance that dance across chisels and sweat-sheened shoulders. Masons pause to drink diluted vinegar wine, their tin cups catching stray sparks of reflected light, and one young worker named Iliades, spying the library's distant roofline, asks Sostratus whether scrolls can burn like torches. The architect smiles, tracing a dusty finger along the outline of a rising block. Scrolls burn, he admits, but they burn inward, first, to memory so their embers can outlive any flame we stack here. He gestures seaward, where the Pharos Foundation sits waist-deep in the tide. This tower will guide ships, the library guides souls. Neither can do the other's work, yet together they hold the city upright, like twin hands cupping a single lamp. The crew falls silent, letting that image anchor their thoughts as they return to lifting stones skyward. Noon brings shimmering heat that blurs the horizon, and Alexandria hums with layered rhythms. Market criers hawking sesame cakes, quarry carts clattering along basalt paving, quills skittering across wax tablets in scriptoriums cooled by trickling aqueduct water. On the library's rooftop terrace, Hypatia and Aglonis set an armillary sphere to track solar declination, its brass hoops flashing messages to the distant scaffold, where Sostratus now directs his men to mount polished marble plaques inscribed in faint cursive. Though miles apart, their gestures echo precise, reverent, and patient, each scholar and builder tracing arcs in air, one of planetary paths, the other of structural load. A seagull wheels between the two worksites, its white wings briefly weaving library and lighthouse into the same glare of Mediterranean sun, before coasting downward to vanish in glittering chop. When shadows lengthen, work slows. In the library's reading cloisters, shadows of pergola vines stripe the parchment pages where Chione copies an Egyptian hymn to Hathor. She pauses whenever hammer blows from the Pharos drift across the lagoon, counting them like distant drums, 1, 2, 3 each, thud settling her heartbeat. To her, the rhythmic pounding feels protective, a stone-built lullaby promising safe harbor to every thought cradled in ink. She wonders whether the masons feel, in turn, the pulse of scribal breaths pushing quiet words into being, and she tucks a note inside her wax tablet. Find a way to send tea and figs to the workers at the tower. Nourishment flows both directions. Dusk uncloaks the lighthouse's amphor-shaped lantern chamber, now hollow and waiting. Sostratus climbs its inner spiral steps hewn so precisely that footfalls produce little more than a padded hush hand, stands beneath the open sky, where cedar rafters will soon cradle enormous fire braziers. He watches the library across rippling water as its clear story windows kindle with amber glow, row upon row, until the facade resembles a scroll of light unfurling against indigo. Stretching his arms wide, he imagines sunlight caught in polished bronze mirrors, here by day, then firelight by night, guiding sailors just as those window lamps guide late scholars through labyrinths of text. He vows to etch an inscription beneath the tower's cornice crediting Sostratus, son of Dexiphanus, on behalf of all mariners. But deep down, he also wishes to add, and in fellowship with the keepers of thought. He knows the king will scrub his name, yet some truths need no chisel to endure. Night folds itself softly around the city, and at the library's main gate, guardians light votive braziers, whose smoke lifts prayers for safe construction across the water. Inside, Callimachus hosts a symposium under the moon-washed peristyle, inviting workers from the Pharos to share grilled sardines and honey cakes beside scholars reciting fragments of Hesiod. Their mingled voices rise, then subside into awed quiet, when a comet brief and pale brushes the northern sky. Hypatia speaks up, explaining celestial debris in calm tones, while a stonemason from Rhodes marvels that stars can tumble just as chips tumble from marble. Before dawn reclaims the city, the last lamp in the library sputters, and a solitary cat pads across the silent hall, ears attuned to gulls crying through pre-morning mist. At the Pharos, a lone sentinel feeds charcoal into the temporary brazier, sending a modest beacon skyward. Its newborn flame winks toward the darkened reading chambers, as if nudging them awake. Across the sleeping harbor, cedar shells seem to shiver, acknowledging the stone giant's vigil, and somewhere between ink and limestone, between firelight and lamplight, Alexandria itself dreams of the day both beacons will blaze in full. The tower's fire roaring against the horizon, the library's learning illuminating every corridor, their combined glow casting a tranquil spell so far and so deep that even restless waves might someday hush to listen. Down in the quiet city streets, vendors dreaming of dawn markets roll over in their sleep, lulled by the far-off pulse of quarry hammers and the hush of turning pages. Soon the pharos will stretch another cubit skyward, and the library will welcome another chest of parchment. But for now, the two remain mid-breath, poised in harmonious suspension. In that balance lies a promise, the promise that guidance comes in many forms. A blazing tower steering wooden hulls through perilous shoals, and a blazing mind steering fragile hopes through perilous doubt. Together they hold vigil over Alexandria, twin beacons anchored in stone and thought, keeping watch until sunrise pours gold upon marble and papyrus alike, and the city wakes once more to the steady song of knowledge meeting light. The hush of early afternoon settles upon the library's western wing like a velvety shawl, muffling the faint footfalls of visitors who drift toward the translation quarter-long, sun-dappled cloister where whisper-thin lattice screens throw shifting mosaics of light across marble tiles. An almost tender fragrance fills the corridor, crushed thyme from the gardens outside, warm beeswax rising from nearby writing lamps, and the sweet note of cedar oil that scholars rub into their fingertips to keep parchment from slipping. At a doorway trimmed in lapis, the great bronze hinges sigh open, and a slender procession enters. Phoenician pilots in indigo cloaks, a Jewish scribe in olive green wool, two Buddhist monks whose saffron robes glow like captive sunrise, and a tall woman from distant Meru bearing bundles of reed scrolls tied with rivergrass cord, tied scraz cords cord grass cord crad and cores core with paps core with os with o with I and with what I to take you and I to to you say up with the dog we took you smell up you They carry between them a hush of anticipation, as if each heartbeat were a sealed amphora. Inside the translation court, long benches of figured sycamore form oval work tables, each strewn with small linen cushions so that elbows never thump or scrape. Above, clear-strowing windows filter the September sun into softened amber, leaving no harsh glare to exhaust the eyes. At the center of the room stands a low marble fountain. Thin streams of water arc from lotus-shaped spouts and fall with the gentlest murmur into a wide basin, the ripples providing both coolness and a steady oral thread to weave different tongues into calm accord. This space, by Ptolemaic decree, is neutral ground. No scroll may be copied here without a second language accompanying it, and no scholar may raise a voice above the fountain's melodic lapping. The rule proves less restriction than balm. Disagreements drift away on the water's hush before they can ever find sharp edges. He greets each visitor by placing one hand over his heart, then gestures toward specially prepared trays. Reed pens cut to varying nib widths for Aramaic, Greek, Demotic, and Sanskrit scripts, pumice stones for smoothing rough papyrus, tiny earthen pots of carbon black, red ochre, and the rare malachite green, reserved for emphasis on important glosses. Hypatia soon joins him, carrying a portable bronze globe that depicts the world as known in this century, its seas rendered in fine silver lines. She sets it near the fountain, so that, throughout the session, anyone may spin the sphere and trace a fingertip from Nile Delta to Indus Plain to Celtic Isles, reminding every scholar present that the library's ambitions are as wide as the spinning earth itself. Work begins with a quiet ritual. The Buddhist monk Dharanindra unfurls a battered palm leaf manuscript inked in graceful polyglyphs that recount the Jodhika tale stories of compassion meant to soothe restless spirits. He seats himself opposite Benjamin, the Jewish scribe, who carefully unrolls a length of fresh papyrus and measured Greek unshells, begins drafting a parallel retelling. With each sentence, Dharanindra whispers. Benjamin pauses to weigh not merely the literal sense, but the cadence, the hush, and the moral fragrance of the original words, so that when Greek syllables flow onto the page, they carry a faint echo of temple bells and sandalwood smoke. Their exchange runs on silence, punctuated only by fountain drops and the soft scrape of reed against fiber. Yet in that muted space worlds migrate across alphabets, shedding none of their inner light. At an adjacent table, Rhodopis of Meru produces a roll penned in a cursive Nubian dialect that charts the flood cycles of the Upper Nile. She confers with Callistrate, a meteorologist from the Mausian, who copies the data into columns of numbers and star symbols. Slowly, they build a bilingual calendar of river moods where one margin notes crocodile nests and flowering grasses, the other plots lunar phases and wind patterns. When they pause to sip honey water, Callistrate marvels that a farmer's almanac from far upriver may guide astronomers calculating tidal drift in the harbor. Rhodopis smiles, replying that water does not respect borders. Neither, then, should knowledge of its wanderings. Their shared laughter rings soft, like two pebbles dropped gently into the marble basin, where concentric ripples briefly overlap before melting into one. Elsewhere, a papyrus merchant from Tyre unwraps a set of purple-dyed sheets describing cedar resin distillation. His translator, Tisa, Greek perfumer, turned chemist records each step with almost reverent care, sketching tiny amphora diagrams to annotate volume and heat. From time to time she lifts her stylus, inhaling deeply to imagine the scent those ancient cedars must have released. Though the recipe traveled hundreds of sea miles, a reader centuries hence may open the finished scroll and, in the mind's quiet laboratory, distill that same resin once more. Thus, across tables, time itself behaves like fluid poured from vessel to vessel. Stories become formulas, formulas become fragrances, fragrances become memory, all without a single border guard to halt their gentle journey. As afternoon light shifts, Hypatia circulates, checking for fatigue. She passes quail shell cups of almond milk mixed with ground dates, the soft sweetness steadying hands that have begun to tremble from long copying. Near the fountain, she pauses to reposition a hanging linen screen, so its shadow protects delicate inks from premature drying. The cloth billows briefly, casting a moving shade like a drifting cloud over a miniature landscape of open scrolls. Scholars glance up and, as the screen settles, smile at one another in silent acknowledgement of the care that binds them. In this room, every adjustment, whether of fabric, flame, or phrasing, is an act of diplomacy, ensuring that each idea can migrate safely from one mind to the next. Toward dusk, Sostratus himself arrives, bearing a gift from the Pharos construction site, a shard of mirror-bright, polished bronze trimmed from the giant parabolic reflector destined for the tower's summit. He sets the curved fragment on a table and lamplight splits into golden fans that dance across papyrus and parchment. May your words travel as far as this light, he murmurs. Dharanindra tilts the scrap to reflect a sliver onto his palm leaf text, while Rhodopis catches a beam and bounces it playfully into the fountain, gilding every ripple. For a moment the room glows, as though the sun itself has dipped one cautious toe through the lattice, lighting every face with the same warm Hugric, Nubian, Phoenician, Hebrew, Indian, no one brighter, no one dimmer, each intellect luminous in equal measure. When the bronze gong at the corridor's end sings the evening note, no scholar rushes to leave. Instead, they gather their finished pages into bundles, tying each with soft twine color coded to the languages now entwined inside. Callimachus records each new text's incipit in the pinax, his stylus moving unhurried, aware that tonight's entries expand, not merely shelves, but horizons, Jataka tales in Greek, Nubian flood tables in star-marked numerals, cedar distillation in the universal grammar of aroma. As the group disperses, Hypatia stands by the doorway, offering a quiet blessing in every tongue she knows, Iron, Shalom, Om Santi, letting the words slide after the departing scholars, like gentle waves brushing a ship's hull. Later, after lamps have been extinguished and guardians resume their silent march, a mild sea breeze threads through half-open shutters, rustling the day's new scrolls. They answer with a soft, papery susurration, half sigh, half lullaby, as if testing their fresh bilingual voices in the dark. Across the harbor, the Pharos' work lanterns send up sparks that drift like bilingual comet dust into the starlit air. Somewhere between tower and library, gulls wheel in the night, carrying neither stone nor ink, yet tracing invisible lines that bind water to wind, wind to word, word to waking dream. And in those airy corridors above the sleeping city, the twin beacons, one of fire, one of thought, burn on, guiding travelers of every shore, reminding them that knowledge, once set adrift upon kind horizons, can find its harbor in every open mind. The Mediterranean dusk of midsummer 48 BCE wrapped Alexandria in an iridescent stillness, as though the city were a pearl held between sunset and sea breeze. From the lighthouse's lantern gallery, the harbor resembled a vast mirror-tinted rose, its glassy hush broken only by the slow dip of oars from Roman triremes gliding toward safe moorings. Along the canopic way, vendors shuttered their stalls with muted clacks, for rumors of civil war drifted through marble streets like faint thunder. Yet, inside the library's peristyle garden, cicadas sang their usual twilight hymn, and the lotus pool reflected lavender clouds so perfectly that even anxious scholars paused to breathe. None could know that beneath that placid sky, a single strategic spark still unborn would soon test the limits of stone, papyrus, and human resolve. Julius Caesar stood on the quarterdeck of his flagship cloak, rippling against polished armor, gaze fixed upon the twin beacons that defined Alexandria's soul. To his right, the Pharos rose like a calm spear of light. To his left, the library's pale colonnades shimmered behind the city walls. For an instant, he felt the ancient magnetism that drew conquerors and philosophers alike to these shores. Yet duty pressed heavier than wonder. Fleeing Pompey's assassins and seeking Egypt's grain, he had anchored fewer than 40 ships in a harbor patrolled by allies of Cleopatra's rival brother. Caesar's, mind efficient as a campaign maps, saw wharves, arsenals, and choke points, but the hush of early evening, tinged with brine and jasmine, whispered a gentler truth. Alexandria was more than a prize. It was a living archive of the world's memory. In choosing force, he would set tinder against parchment, though he did not yet sense how swiftly embers judge ambition. Within the library's western annex, scroll keepers rearranged cedar drawers with the reverence of gardeners moving delicate orchids. Calamacooses, pineaches lay open on a bronze stand, its inked columns trembling under lamplight as distant catapults groaned somewhere beyond the necropolis walls. Hypatius, spiritual elder, the grammarian Philotas, led a soft rehearsal of evacuation drills routes plodded through shadowed corridors, baskets woven to cradle fragile papyri, signal bells muffled with linen to ring discreet alarms. Yet many scholars refused to leave their desks. They believed centuries-old stone and pharaoh-blessed charters made them immune to the chaos of politics. When the first thud of a distant ballista resonated through the marble floor, the guardians simply tightened their patrol knots and whispered that night storms sometimes passed without spilling a single drop of rain. Rain, however, was not Caesar's weapon. As skirmishes erupted on the eastern wharves, he ordered warehouse hulks nearest the enemy, seized and torched to deny berth and cover to Ptolemy's fleet. Pitch barrels were split like ripe figs, flames licked rigging lines and leaped into summer-dry sailcloth with ferocious appetite. What began as tactical kindling soon outgrew intent, fanned by onshore winds racing along the Heptastadian causeway. The Pharaoh's keepers watched with widening eyes as tongues of gold and crimson vaulted from mast to mast, turning moored triremes into floating pyres that drifted eerily seaward before collapsing in hissing steam. Above the roar, gulls screamed and wheeled like torn parchment caught in an updraft, their startled cries the only herald the library's readers received of the approaching calamity. Embers rode the wind across the Harbortini meteors, blown landward by night's first breath. They settled on wooden awnings of customs houses, on palm-frond roofs of spice depots, and finally on the tar-sealed crates stacked outside the museum's scroll-copying annex. One by one, orange pinpoints blossomed into silent flames that gnawed through canvas, popping resin seals with the brittle snap of an ink-dry papyrus tube. A librarian named Syrian, stepping outside to cool a feverish brow, caught the acrid scent of burning cedar and turned to witness sparks skittering across portico tiles like fireflies possessed. She struck the nearest alarm bellet's linen muffler, stifling the clamor to a muted gongand. The annex sprang awake in a swirl of sandaled feet, hastily filled water jars, and cats fleeing with fur bristled into bottle-brush arcs. Inside the main scroll chamber, smoke seeped beneath oaken doors in wispy tendrils, curling like dark questions along ceiling beams before descending upon oil lamps in suffocating shawls. Scholars coughed, eyes stinging, yet even as guardians herded them toward safer halls, many clutched armfuls of treatises and lyrical fragments rather than personal belongings. Syrian's bucket brigade formed a human river students, passing earthen vessels from fountain to fireline, their wet tunics plastered to pounding chests. Hypatius' earlier rescue plans took shape, rare astronomical scrolls bundled into sailcloth and ferried to an underground cistern, medical texts relocated to a stone-vaulted lecture theater where humidity was already controlled. Through choking haze, the guardian staffs tapped marble in rhythmic cues. Left means exit, right means help, creating a sonic map that guided the half-blinded toward pockets of safety. Beyond the library walls, the wider city simmered in anxious twilight. Market stall owners smothered wicker roofs with wet nets. Priests of Serapis carried icons to courtyards, thought immune to fire's appetite. And up on the Pharos, Sostratus tightened the lantern shutters, fearing stray sparks might leap the gap and ignite stores of olive oil. He could see the glow blooming around the Museum Complexus II, cruel sunrise that painted his limestone tower blood-red. Gritting his teeth, he ordered signal torches waved toward the city garrison, pleading for additional water gangs. But soldiers already grappled with riots near the royal quarter, and few could be spared for intellectual treasure when flesh-and-blood citizens cried for aid. In that frantic calculus, papyrus lost to blade and blaze seemed a remote sorrow, yet the tower keepers still flashed their desperate semaphore into smoke-thickening night. Hours dragged in feverish slow motion, flames chewed cedar shelving until beams groaned like wounded beasts and collapsed in ashen sighs. In the annex of public lectures, benches were flipped to form crude firebreaks. Parchment sheets saturated with fountain water plastered the archways, steam billowing where heat met moisture in angry hiss. Syrian's brigade, faces streaked with soot, worked past exhaustion-passing water, hauling charred debris, guiding elders to cooler chambers. Somewhere, a stack of newly translated Nubian flood calendars ignited, sending rivers of molten ink winding across mosaic floors before pooling into glistening black delta shapes. Above that ruin, the painted ceiling of the Calliope Stoa blistered and peeled, its muses, once delicate lyre, warping in fiery torment until strings snapped with plaintive twangs. Every leaf lost felt like a verse exhaled into oblivion, yet every scroll carried free felt like a heartbeat briefly spared. At last, just before dawn, wind shifted seaward, and a curtain of humid air drifted from Lake Mareotis, dampening sparks and granting weary defenders a fragile reprieve. By then the annex lay gutted, its roof a jagged silhouette against soot-rubbed stars. But the central bibliothèque, fortified by stone vaults, and the frantic labors of guardians still stood, smoke-scarred, yet breathing. When Syrian stepped through its battered doors, she found Callimachus's pine-aches intact upon its bronze stand, though its once gleaming surface was now matte with ash. She traced a trembling finger along the first entry Homer, the Iliadon, allowed herself one silent tear, equal parts grief for volumes lost and gratitude for volumes spared. Outside, the air smelled of wet charcoal and brackish tears, yet the dawn breeze also carried something gentler, the faint, salt-tinged promise that knowledge, though singed, could sprout anew from buried embers. News of the blaze reached Caesar as he conferred with officers in a commandeered granary. Maps spread over crate tables, still warm from the night's battle heat. A messenger, voice hoarse, relayed the conflagration's scope. The general's brow furrowed, lips tightening at an unintended consequence he had neither desired nor foreseen. War wields broad strokes, and the loss of books rarely tips the scales of conquest. He had somewhere within the seasoned strategist, father of codified calendars, and admirer of Cato's eloquence, a quiet pang, registered be ordered a detachment to assist in firefighting, but knew the gesture floated on ash-choked wind, arriving too late to quench regret. Thus, even victors learn the fragility of legacies forged in ink rather than iron, legacies that burn faster than any ship yet sail farther than any legion. When the sun finally crowned the horizon, its first rays pierced tattered smoke and glanced upon a city both wounded and awake. Citizens crept from doorways to tally damage, charred masts protruding from the harbor like skeletal fingers, spice-laden warehouses reduced to fragrant ruin, and the library's annex smoldering behind scorched porticos. Yet, alongside despair bloomed resilience. Water brigades still roamed, dousing sparks before they could reignite. Scribes gathered in the surviving halls, comparing lists of scrolls, rescued versus lost, and in an inner courtyard, Hypatia's predecessors unfurled intact star charts, as if to prove that cosmos and curiosity remained unshattered. Above them, the Pharos lantern blazed defiantly, beaconing not just to mariners, but to every shaken scholar below. Light endures. So ends the night, when iron strategy scorched fragile memory, when a tactical flame leaped borders no map had drawn. In the chapters of Alexandria's saga, this verse would echo in sue-trimmed margins, future guardians that wisdom, like fire, spreads beyond control, yet also kindles anew in every seeking mind. And as twilight returned 24 hours later, a hush again settled over the recovering city. Pages rustled, hammers tapped on fallen beams, and cats padded through cooled ashes hunting embers that dared still glow. Within that softened hush, the library's heartbeat, diminished but unbroken, resumed its delicate cadence, for knowledge, though wounded, had survived the night, carrying forward on smoke-tempered wings to whisper its story to centuries yet unborn. The first morning after the great blaze dawned pearl-gray and brittle, carrying a hush so complete that even the gulls seemed reluctant to break it. From the royal balcony, Cleopatra surveyed her capital, inhaling the mingled scents of wet charcoal, cooling plaster, and sea salt that drifted inland on a tentative breeze. Below her, smoke curled in lazy ribbons above the library's scarred annex, while the Pharos flamen wavering through the night still cast its amber path across the harbor's calm skin. In that moment, the young queen felt a solemn hush press against her ribs, the weight of a civilization's memory, singed but unbeaten, waiting for steady hands to coax it back into bloom. She tightened the emerald clasp at her throat, summoned her council, and quietly vowed that Alexandria's heart would beat stronger than ever, no matter how fiercely the night had tried to smother it. By late morning, Cleopatra strode through soot-dappled porticos, accompanied by a small retinue of scholars, artisans, and stonemasons. Soft sandals whispering over mosaic floors, now marbled with ash. Guardians bowed but did not speak. Their red-rimmed eyes told stories of bucket chains and smoke-choked lungs that words could only bruise. The queen paused beside the central bibliothecate's limestone facade, pocked and blackened, yet unbowdened, laid her palm against the warm, scorched stone. "We rebuild," she murmured, voice low as a lullaby. Philetus, the grammarian, unfurled a wax tablet, listing every volume lost, each title inscribed like a fallen soldier's name. Cleopatra scanned the columns, then handed the tablet to her chief treasurer with orders to spare no silver for restoration. Papyrus, cedar, pigments, wages, ships, whatever the museum required, Egypt's grain wealth would supply. Her decree spread through the city like a cool dawn breeze, soothing frightened hearts with the promise that knowledge was a treasure their queen would ransom at any cost. Salvage began that same afternoon. Lines of apprentices moved through charred corridors in hushed procession, brushing soot from fire-blistered scroll cases, sealing cracked papyrus in damp linen, and stacking carbonized fragments in oilskin packets for future deciphering. Stonecutters chipped away perilous overhangs, while cats unscathed by smoke, thanks to their subterranean haunts, browed rubble for errant vermin made bold by chaos. At twilight, lamplight flickered over a makeshift triage tent, where Hypatia's predecessors gently unfurled singed leaves onto pumice trays, coaxing brittle fibers back to suppleness with breaths of rose-steamed air. Every rescued word felt like a heartbeat restarted, every saved diagram a pulse of collective memory. Though exhaustion scored deep lines on faces young and old, the work unfolded in reverent silence, as if each person understood they were stitching threads in a tapestry far older and far gentler than any single reign or battle. Yet Cleopatra knew salvaging alone would not suffice. Drawing on her formidable gift for diplomacy, she penned scrolls to Pergamon, Athens, and Rhodes, requesting duplicate manuscripts and offering in return Egyptian grain and rare glassware. Mark Antony, newly arrived in Alexandria and eager to entwine his fortunes with hers, seized upon the mission as proof of Rome's cultured magnanimity. Within weeks, he dispatched couriers along every sea route under his command, promising rich favor to any library or private collector willing to lend or copy their volumes for Egypt's wounded sanctuary. Pergamon responded first, pledging entire shelves of philosophy and medicine. Athens followed with crates of drama and oratory. Rhodes including veteran ship captains who owed the Pharos many a safe landfall ford navigational treatises and star charts. In royal correspondence, Antony called these gifts a dowry to wisdom, and Cleopatra, amused by the phrase, sealed his letters with wax, impressed by the effigy of Isis guiding a ship through moonlit surf. On a still October dawn, the first relief convoy entered the eastern harbor. 16 broad-beamed barges, painted Nile green, their holds perfumed by cedar chests packed tight with scrolls. Long trains of linen canopied carts waited quayside, each wheel wrapped in oiled leather to hush its creak across city streets. As dock workers unloaded the treasure, a chorus of flute players stationed along the quay released a soft, rippling melody meant to welcome not dignitaries but ideas themselves, sounds rising like incense to honor unseen authors whose words had sailed seas to find new refuge. Citizens lining the boulevards bowed their heads. Some wept in quiet gratitude, others breathed toshapish, the ancient blessing for safe arrival. The parade advanced at a measured pace, saffron banners fluttering just enough to fan the papyrus bundles with cool shade. Within the library's restored courtyards, apprentices spread red mats beneath colonnades and carefully unpacked each chest, cataloging titles with Callimachus's resurrected rubric, while temple choir boys sprinkled water to tame dust and heat. Even as new knowledge flowed in, artisans labored to restore the library's wounded architecture. Carpenters sliced cedar planks into shelving fragranced with tree sap sweetness, their mallets cushioned by felt to keep the courtyard's hush intact. Masons, guided by Sostrotus himself, blended powdered marble with honey-colored mortar, patching fire-split columns until scars seemed natural veins in the stone. A team of linen weavers crafted fresh humidity screens, dyed gentle lapis. Their weave loose enough to breathe, yet dense enough to shield ink from summer's glare. At night, lamplighters raised bronze candelabras, trimmed with mirrored petals, gifted from the Pharos workshops, doubling the glow without doubling flame. Cats resumed their silent patrols, whiskers twitching at unfamiliar scents of pergamene parchment and Rhodian beeswax, until even the smallest corners hummed with the reassuring rhythm of normalcy rediscovered. Copyists, meanwhile, launched a tireless campaign of resurrection. In the scriptorium, now relocated to a vaulted hall spared by the fire rows of scholars bent over fresh papyrus, reed quills dancing through the lavender hours before dawn. To maintain calm tempo and protect voice, they sang underbreath cadences, Homeric hexameter tapped with fingertip, Buddhist gaddis whispered between breaths, Hebrew psalms hummed like lullabies. Each saved fragment became a seed. From a charred scrap of Euripides, They regrew entire tragedies, cross-checking verses with Athenian copies until choruses once again flowed like water across the page. Lost herbal treatises were reimagined from physicians' marginal notes, obliterated star charts redrawn from sailors' memories of constellations glimpsed on midnight watch. Cleopatra visited often, treading softly among desks, offering pomegranates or pearls of encouragement. Her presence lent daylight to the night crew, reminding them that every line they inked fortified the spine of Egypt's legacy. When the time came to celebrate the library's rebirth, the queen chose not pomp but poetry. At dusk, she led a modest procession into the main hall, where torches flickered against walls newly washed but still faintly scarred, deliberately left, so, she said, that remembrance could temper pride. Mark Antony stood at her right, tunic trimmed in Alexandrian indigo. To her left, Hyposia's ancestors unfurled a silk banner depicting a phoenix rising from scroll-shaped flames. In the hush, Cleopatra lifted a single rescued papyrusan ode of Sappho, no wider than her palmand, read 4 lines in clear, slow cadence. The words, carried on harp and hush, spoke of love enduring beyond storm and shadow. When she finished, no applause broke the silence. Instead, attendees bowed their heads, letting the stillness seal the poem into collective memory. Only then did the choir of temple girls ignite trays of myrrh chips, whose smoke curled upward in soft spirals, scenting the hall with a promise older than any crown. In the weeks that followed, scholars discovered something quietly miraculous. The fire, though cruel, had refreshed their devotion. Attendance at dawn lectures doubled. Translation courts buzzed with renewed urgency. Even the city's stonemasons petitioned to learn basic rhetoric, saying that if walls could fall in one night, words should be their second craft. A physician who lost his personal copy of Herophilus's Anatomy began sketching organs from fresh dissections, producing diagrams clearer than the originals. A teenage copyist, inspired by tales of lost epics, composed her own verses about the Phoenix banner unveiled at the ceremony. Her mentors, recognizing promise, placed her poem beside Callimachus's Pinax, an informal footnote noting rebirth in real time. Thus knowledge did more than resume. It evolved, the trauma of loss, fertilizing shoots of innovation that would one day blossom beyond any tablet's tally. By the next inundation season, the library breathed almost as freely as before, though guardians still traced fingers along doorframes each night, feeling for warmth that might hint at hidden embers. Pergamene scrolls and Rhodian star charts nestled comfortably with fresh Egyptian copies, their foreign twine colors, cobalt, rust, seafoam, twining like braided rivers across shelves. When desert winds rattled shutters, lamplighters tightened window sheaths, and thought of cedar barges arriving through foam-flecked waves. When copyists paused to stretch aching backs, they gazed at ceiling frescoes newly cleaned, where muses once blistered now gleamed with quiet resilience. And somewhere in those painted eyes, each scholar glimpsed the unspoken covenant linking queen, mason, sailor, scribe, and cat, that ideas, once cherished, would always find hands ready to shelter them, no matter how fierce the flames that roared outside. So, the library rose again, not merely rebuilt, but reborn. Its corridors carrying the faint twin scents of ash and cedar, reminders of what had perished and what had come to take its place. Travelers arriving at the Pharos, still steered by its mighty beam. But now, as they walked inland along the Canopic Way, they passed vendors selling commemorative tokens, tiny clay phoenixes, sprigs of dried papyrus tied with indigo thread, and brass mirrors, etched with the Queen's pledge. Lux in tenebris rexeret, light shall rule in darkness. At night, when the latest copyist blew out her lamp, and the last guardian tucked his cloak against the cool, a deep, contented hush settled over marble and ink alike. The library's heart, once threatened by careless sparks, now beat stronger, slow, steady, and luminous beneath the tranquil Egyptian stars. The season after Cleopatra's great rescue began with a hush sweeter than any hymn, a hush born not of fear, but of contentment, the long, luxuriant exhale a city releases when crisis has passed and steady breathing returns. Dawn light seeped through freshly washed clerestory windows, kissing the marble floors until they shimmered like pale water. In the inner courtyards, orange blossoms unfurled in slow motion, their fragrance mingling with faint cedar and myrrh that still scented the library's cedar racks. Not a single hammer struck stone that morning. Restorations were complete, scaffolds gone, canvas tarps folded away. Instead, the only percussion came from the soft slap of sandals as scribes filed in, and the liquid notes of a 9-string cathora, plucked somewhere in a colonnadet's melody, climbing the sunlit columns like a contented vine. Beneath those gilded shafts of light, Alexandria's heart resumed a pulse both tranquil and assured, inviting scholars to explore its restored arteries at their own unhurried pace. Inside the main bibliothèque, the hush settled gently over rows of newly aligned cubbies, their twine ribbons crimson for poetry, indigo for science, saffron for philosophy, trembling in the faint breeze that drifted through lattice windows. Morning copyists dipped reed pens into carbon ink, their wrists moving in a measured choreography that looked to a passing observer like the rise and fall of oars on a mirror-still lake. Across the hall, apprentices tended the ward of silences, piecing together charred fragments with wafer-thin slivers of papyrus and rice paste so delicate it resembled early mist. Yet the labor no longer carried a fevered urgency. Instead, every gesture felt ceremonially slow, as though time itself had refilled its lungs after the blaze, and agreed to move forward only at a librarian's whisper. The result was a pervasive calm, the sort of steady ambience that could cradle even the most restless mind into soft-spoken curiosity, true sleep aid for the hurried soul. Among the scholars who flourished in this renewed serenity was Eratosthenes of Cyrene, whose gentle laughter now echoed daily beneath the astronomy portico. Using a bronze gnomon planted in the central courtyard, he tracked the angle of the noonday sun, jotting figures onto wax tablets before strolling and hurried through shaded walkways to confer with traveling surveyors. His measurements, cross-checked against distances paced along desert roads, gradually resolved into a calculation of the Earth's circumference. Yet the process unfolded so calmly, so quietly, that nearby gardeners barely noticed a revolution in human understanding blooming like jasmine at their feet. In the evenings, apprentices would find him reclining on a cushioned bench, comparing star maps under lamplight, while the fountain's ripple provided a lullaby of liquid numerals. Even monumental discovery respected the library's vow. Every insight must arrive on softly padded feet. The medical cloisters thrived as well, guided by disciples of Herophilus, who now emphasized gentle pedagogy over dramatic spectacle. Stone anatomy tables were polished to a moon-white sheen, and above them linen curtains filtered daylight into a pearly glow bright enough for precise incisions, soft enough to keep nerves at ease. Students moved with deliberate, quiet scalpels glinting like thin crescents of silver dawn. their whispered discussions of arteries and humors weaving through the room like gauzy threads. When lectures concluded, instruments were rinsed in rosewater and laid upon tasseled towels embroidered with the caduceus, the subtle aroma of petals masking sharper scents. Patients recovering in shaded alcoves listened to physicians read poems by Sappho or calming hymns to Isis, believing, as many still do, that healing begins when the heartbeat finds a slower song. Across the peristyle gardens, poets and philosophers took advantage of the restored tranquility to host symposia of the breeze gatherings, limited to 10 voices so that conversation never rose above the rustle of plane-tree leaves. Here, under dappled shade, Stoics debated Epicureans, each side pausing often to sip chilled pomegranate juice from clay beakers whose rims were cool to the touch. Foreign languages coexisted with ease. An Armenian merchant recited love verses in a lilting dialect, while a Nubian astronomer translated them into Greek hexameter, line by gentle line. No raised voices, no hard lines, only an ebb and flow of ideas paced to the pulse of cicadas, a testament to the doctrine circulating on every breeze. Knowledge without borders remains the surest balm for restless hearts. Travelers felt the difference the moment their sandals touched the cool basalt of the portico steps. Sip a mild honey tisane and peruse an illustrated guide to the library's color-coded system. Volunteer docents offered gentle tours that emphasized orientation over AOE. They invited guests to feel the grain of papyrus under their fingertips, to listen for the faint crackle inside a scroll being opened, to notice how even the water clocks ticked in soft droplets rather than clanging gears. Many visitors pirates turned merchants, ex-legionaries turned pilgrims remarked that the place seemed to murmur rather than speak, as if respecting those who carried secret battles in their chests. Every element of daily life conspired to maintain the hush. Water clocks were fitted with felt-lined troughs, so their drip resembled rain on distant leaves. Incense masters blended softer resins, frankincense, cut with orchid sap, producing wisps of aroma that drifted like barely remembered dreams. Even the cats appeared to purr at a lower register, content now that shelves once again offered warm cedar ledges for midday naps. In the evenings, guardians performed their rounds in pairs, staffs capped with leather, so their taps on marble registered more as a heartbeat than a knock. On lantern lighting duty, apprentices used mirrored reflectors from the Pharos workshops to amplify glow without adding flame, ensuring text remained crisp under gentle luminance, perfect for soft-spoken night narration. When moonrise silvered the rooftops, the library's rooftop terrace became an observatory of both stars and minds. Every exchange accompanied by a nod and a quiet Eucharist thank you. From the harbor, the lighthouse sent its pivoting beam across the dark water, an enormous, slow-breathing presence echoing the library's quieter heart pulse. As constellations wheeled overhead, Hypatia's inheritors pointed out Pleiades, Orion, Canopus, their voices scarcely louder than the sighing night wind. A visiting musician plucked a kithora set to Phrygian mode, each note hanging in the air like a duperal before melting into silence. Long after midnight, when the final star chart was rolled away, many remained simply to listen to the hush itself, the steady, calming narration of waves against seawall, a perpetual sleep aid for every ear turned skyward. So unfolded Alexandria's quiet golden age, no grand conquest, no thunder of triumphal arches, only the deep, sustainable glow of minds at peace and busy hands that valued gentleness as strongly as genius. The library's rebuilt walls held more than scrolls. They cradled a philosophy that every guest could feel in muscle and marrow, that learning carried out in serenity plants seeds which even conflagration cannot fully destroy. Cats would still prowl, tides would still swell, politics would still churn beyond the colonnades, but within, time seemed to slow to a measured breath, inviting scholars and sailors alike to rest, to read, to dream. Under that encompassing hush, the pages of human curiosity turned without haste, every rustle a promise that knowledge, when tended in quiet kindness, can illuminate the darkest harbor and lull the weariest traveler safely to sleep. A hushed amber dawn eased across Alexandria, stroking the library's marble entablatures and the distant red tiles of synagogues, shrines, and basilicas alike. Cypress shadows still clung to colonnades when the first scholars gathered for what the custodians now called the Circle of Many Tongues, a weekly colloquy, where belief systems breathed side by side instead of contending for air. Soft leather sandals whispered over dew-damp mosaics as participants arrived in small, reverent knots. Stoic philosophers draped in plain white hamations, rabbis wearing fringed shawls that swayed like lullaby tassels, priests of Isis whose ankle bells chimed as faintly as wind through reeds, and, newest of all, followers of a Galilean teacher calling themselves Christians, bearing reed baskets of bread and olives to share. No herald announced them, no gong struck. Instead, the fountain at the court's center provided the opening note, its liquid cadence reminding everyone present that dialogue, like water, must flow gently to carve lasting pathways through even the hardest stone. Benches had been arranged in a loose circle beneath trellised vines, heavy with late summer grapes. At each seat lay a palm-sized wax tablet, a reed stylus, and a sprig of myrtle, symbol of shared peace since the days of Achaemenid couriers. Syrian, now ascended to chief librarian, welcomed the assembly in a voice no louder than the flutter of parchment. She explained the simple rules. Each speaker would hold a small alabaster lamp while talking, passing it along when finished. No voice should rise above the fountain's murmur, and every question must open with the phrase, "Guide me through your window," signaling humility and the intent to see from another's vantage. The participants nodded, their varied garments rustling like layered pages in a single scroll. Even the resident cats seemed to understand, curling beneath benches without a sound, as though prepared to guard moments of silence as fiercely as any parchment. The lamp's first glow fell to Rabbi Monachum, whose beard caught early light the way papyrus catches ink. Cradling the flickering flame, he spoke of the Shema, "Hear, O Israel," describing how attentive listening itself was a form of worship. His Hebrew syllables drifted through the courtyard like soft chimes, and when he finished, he passed the lamp to Heliodora, a priestess of Isis. She told of Maat, the cosmic balance inscribed in feather and heart, her words rolling like river lullabies across polished stone. A Stoic named Demetrios accepted the lamp next, expounding on apatheia, that tranquil steadiness mirroring the library's own cultivated hush. Each discourse flowed into the next without edges, the lamp's glow stitching together divergent theologies into a single tapestry of calm inquiry. Listeners etched short notes onto wax tablets, careful strokes that looked less like counter-arguments and more like footprints on a shared path. When the alabaster lamp reached the Christians, a youthful deacon called Theophilus rose. Sun-gold haloed his head, yet his tone remained moon-gentle. He recited a fragment of the Beatitudes, Blessed are the peacemakers, first in lilting coin Greek, then slowly again in Coptic for the native listeners. Rather than preach, he described early house church gatherings, where bread was broken and questions were welcomed, like weary travelers offered water. Some call our meetings agape feasts, he whispered, because love, poured softly, fills every vessel the same. His words, steadied by the flame he held, met no resistance, solely thoughtful, quiet, as if everyone present recognized the melody beneath different lyrics. When he finished, he set the lamp upon the fountain's rim, so rippling water multiplied its light 100-fold, reflecting that even a single belief, mirrored in respect, can illuminate many faces without burning any. Dialogue continued in this pooled brightness. A Mithraic initiate compared the Tauroctoni's symbolism to the Jewish Akedah, Abraham's binding of Isaac, prompting rabbis and priests alike to trace parallels in sacrifice and salvation. Syrian astrologers pulled star discs from linen satchels, aligning constellations that each faith claimed in its own narratives. Bethlehem's star, Osiris's Orion, the Hebrew Mazzaroth, showing how heaven's map welcomes every pilgrim. Not once did voices sharpen. When disagreement surfaced, it settled like dusk on still water, coloring perception without stirring waves. Guardians patrolling outer corridors paused to listen, leaning their staffs against walls so as not to clatter. They would later say the court sounded like wind through a grove, many trunks, one breeze. As midday heat climbed, Syrian signaled for respite. Apprentices glided forward, bearing earthen pitchers of pomegranate troze sherbet and platters of barley cakes layered with fig paste. The assembly shared the fare in companionable hush, wicker baskets passing from Stoic to Sadducee, from priestess to philosopher. Hands brushing, but never clutching, each touch a silent promise that nourishment, intellectual or bodily, is sweetest when freely offered. Cats received their portion, too, nibbling fig crumbs with delicate civility. Somewhere in the rafters, a dove cooed, and someone joked softly in 3 languages that even feathered messengers wished a seat at the symposium. Laughter rose, subdued but bright, like tiny bells shaking sleep from a dreaming temple. After the meal, the circle moved into shaded arcades where painted frescoes recently restored depicted the 9 muses playing instruments of varied lands. An Egyptian lute. Their discussion turned to practical cooperation. Rabbi Menachem proposed a joint scriptorium project, translating Proverbs and Hesiod's works and days onto facing pages so farmers could glean wisdom from both Jewish and Hellenic traditions. Heliodora offered temple scribes skilled in enamel pigments to illuminate herbals, with images aiding Christian healers tending the poor. Theophilus volunteered his community's singers to record psalms in modal scales that Persian astronomers used in start-timing rituals, merging music with mathematics. Each proposal was noted onto a larger cedar board hung beneath the arcade, its columns soon filling with pledges a living charter of shared endeavors, gently flapping whenever sea breezes wandered in. Evening's lavender light found the circle in the stoa of echoes along. Narrow hall whose acoustics softened any sound into velvet. Here, Demetrios led a closing meditation on the Stoic logos, the rational breath threading all existence. Participants inhaled, exhaled, and listened to their own rhythms mingling with neighbors. A collective respiration that felt like the library's ancient breath renewed. When eyes opened, the alabaster lamp had dwindled to a tired ember. Syrian lifted it carefully, tilting its final spark into the fountain where it hissed to silence a ritual, extinguishing that symbolized not an end but a gentle sealing of dialogues to be revisited next week. One by one, the scholars departed along torchlit colonnades, their silhouettes merging with lengthening shadows, conversations lingering like warm drafts in their wake. That night, as guardians resumed their moonlit rounds, the library seemed to hum with an extra layer of calm. Scroll racks no longer stood merely as silent witnesses to centuries' knowledge. They felt, somehow, like resonant strings still vibrating from the day's soft plucks of diverse faith. In distant dormitories, visiting monks recited psalms beside Stoics rehearsing maxims. Across gardens, young deacons traded Hebrew idioms for Coptic lullabies with rabbinical students. Even the water clocks appeared to drip more leisurely, as though savoring this era where questions grew like lotus in untroubled ponds, and high above, the Pharos beacon swept its regal arc over dark waters, an immense, steady heartbeat, cowing the smaller but no less vital lamp that had passed from hand to gentle hand, proving again that light, when shared softly, multiplies without dividing. So unfolded the library's season of interwoven faithsa chapter, without conquest or conflagration, yet as profound as any conquest of land or rebuilding of stones. Under starlit vaults and vine-shadowed courts, belief systems once wary now shaped a choir of whispering voices, each timbre distinct, yet all tuned to the same quiet key. Where dogma might have clashed, curiosity instead traced bridges. Where zeal might have burned, empathy pooled like cool fountain water. In that hush, scholars discovered a new theorem of spirit, that dialogue conducted in gentleness is itself a form of worship, a living manuscript neither moth nor flame can consume. And as sleepers drifted beneath reed roofs across Alexandria, the memories of that day lingered like a calming narration, easing minds into dreams where every window opened upon another, guiding one soul through the next, until the entire city breathed as a single, peaceful whole. The first hints of spring had only just softened Alexandria's mornings when Hypatia rose before dawn, slipping through the hushed cloisters with a pile of wax tablets balanced against her heart. Marble still held the night's coolness, and each sandal step left a ghostly imprint of condensation soon whisked away by the faint jasmine breeze that drifted from garden to corridor. She paused beneath the cedar arch where guardians traced their nightly rounds, gently pressed her fingers to the familiar notch in the frame, and breathed in the mingled fragrances of beeswax, myrtle, and sea salts that had become the heartbeat of her life's long conversation with knowledge. Today's lecture, she told herself, would be simple and luminous, a meditation on conic sections, how circles, ellipses, parabolas could sing the same quiets, parabolas could sing the same quiet song, whether whispered in geometry or traced in a planetary endonance, wandering in the planet's banner, and of says so about with get and boy and of a vil and to be hip who you and get I band bullet but to where by I to at I will I have to woot you like out with cock with some word with word where a few would have more than we pick up would have believed if it died at if to read with good it would be her gift to students newly arrived from Athens and Berenike, an invitation to see harmony where others saw disarray. She entered the mathematics hall just as the fountain's clocks marked the first hour, their droplets striking bronze bowls with soft, deliberate cadence. A semicircle of benches awaited her, each draped with fresh linen to welcome Bodhis, wearied from night study. The new students sat among more seasoned disciples' boys, with desert sand still clinging to their sandals. Girls whose palms bore the faint ridges of reed harvests, a Persian sailor sporting starring tattoos along his forearm. All eyes lifted as she set her tablets upon the lectern. Yet, instead of beginning, Hypatia walked to the courtyard doors, threw them open, and invited the sunrise inside. Golden light streamed over mosaics depicting the muses, turning tesserae to liquid flame, coaxing yawns into soft smiles. Geometry, she said, voice scarcely louder than the hush, is simply the morning reorganizing night's shadows. With a chalk of powdered alabaster, she drew a perfect circle on the basalt slabs, whiteness sharp against black stone. This, she murmured, is wholeness. A gentle arc of her wrist transformed the circle into an ellipse, elongated yet faithful to its twin foci hidden beneath chalk's thin skin. Here is love stretched by distance, yet held by two steady hearts. She swept the curve further, spine straight as a cypress, and the parabola unfurled open, welcoming, receptive to every wandering shaft of sunlight. Finally, a graceful pivot of elbow birthed the hyperbola, twin wings of possibility forever approaching but never meeting. Each transformation was accompanied by a hush so deep it felt like collective breath drawn through silk. Students leaned forward, their shadows merging over the slab like constellations gathering into new myth. She guided them through proofs, as if leading them down candlelit garden paths. How the sum of distances to both foci remained constant. How reflective properties whispered secrets of burning mirrors and lighthouse beams. When questions budded soft, tentative, she answered by tracing fingertips over pupils' wax tablets, shaping symbols into tactile reassurance. Even the hall's resident cats, Carax and Melita, sensed the sanctity of the moment. They curled atop cedar cabinets, tails flicking in measured approval as the theorems flowered one after another. Outside, gulls swept overhead in gentle spirals, their cries softened by lattice shutters, so the only music was the scratch of stylus, the sigh of robes, and the distant heartbeat of waves upon harborside stone. Near midday, she paused, inviting everyone to rest beneath the portico, where shade-dappled breezes swayed grape leaves like slow pendulums. Attendants served diluted honey water, perfumed with lemon verbena. Steam curled in lazy ribbons, carrying warmth to chilled fingers. Hypatia took a small copper sphere from her satchel, its surface etched with latitudinal lines, and spun it upon a low table. Each conic, she said, dwells already in this globe, awaiting the blade of perspective. She produced a slender bronze lamina, sliced the sphere's shadow with measured tilt, and projected a moving ellipse onto the linen wall, sunlight carving geometry from air itself. Gasps floated up, hushed but bright, as if dawn had blossomed again inside the dusk school hall. The lesson turned contemplative. She spoke of harmony, of dialogue, of how Assidius, fragile as papyrus, as resilient as limestone, could enfold many creeds within one bustling ellipse of harbor and desert. She quoted fragments from the Circle of Many Tongues, phrases still dew fresh on her memory. Guide me through your window, logos, ma'at, agape. Each term, she suggested, mapped to a curve their intersections, forming Alexandria's living geometry, where hearts might converge without losing singularity. Students scribbled not proofs now, but quiet pledges, to seek the shared focus between differing viewpoints, to remain open arcs rather than closed circles. In that hush, Theory seeped beneath ribs, becoming pulse, as afternoon glowed tawny on colonnade stone. Rumblings from the distant royal quarter drifted on the breeze, nothing overt, just a faint undertow of raised voices carried through alley mazes. Guardians exchanged glances, but kept their staffs low, unwilling to fracture the hall's tranquility. Hypatia sensed the disturbance like a tremor beneath marble, but continued calmly, directing students to pair off, each demonstrating reflective properties with polished bronze mirrors no larger than a palm. Laugh whispers rippled as sunlight bounced between partners, ellipses of brightness dancing across cedar shelves, landing occasionally on charred but restored architraves, still bearing the fire's faint scar. Even potential discord could not breach the bubble of curiosity she'd spun. When the final bell, muted with felt, chimed the evening hour, she closed her wax tablet with both hands and embrace, sealing thought into future bloom. Students rose in unison, offering the silence reserved for sacred farewells. Hypatia thanked them for lending their breath to geometry's song and urged them to walk home slowly. So each step may finish the proof your minds began. One by one they filed into violet twilight, carrying bronze mirrors, chalk-dusted robes, and hearts steadied by the morning's gentle rigor. In the courtyard she lingered, collecting stray styluses, aligning benches, her motions so routine they resembled prayer. Only when shadows pooled thick around fountain bases did she dan her hood and step into the quiet streets. Escorted by two guardians whose sandals matched her measured cadence, lamps flickered in upper-story windows. Distant chants, rougher than her circle's dialogue, grated the evening hush. Yet she walked calmly, seeing in her mind's eye the ellipse, the constant sum of distances, the promise that Tifosi reason and compassion could never be sundered by mere space. Around a corner, torchlight flared and voices rose, but the geometry within her remained unbroken, a circle of wholeness, bright as any lighthouse beam. And while history would later cast the scene in harsher metals, those who witnessed her final journey agreed on one truth: Hypatia moved like the quiet moon, guiding steadfast tides, serene even as distant thunder gathered, leaving behind a corridor still trembling with chalk-brights, proof that in Alexandria only for that long luminous. The hush that followed Hypatia's last dawn seemed at first an ordinary stillness. The same soft veil Alexandria always drew across its marble shoulders when evening lamps guttered out. But beneath that familiar quiet, a subtler change took hold like a harp string tuned a breath to tight vibrating through porticos, shop stalls, and shoreline taverns. In the library's inner courts, guardians noticed it in the way cats lifted their heads at distant shouts, ears pricked not to playful market cries, but to harsher strains curling in from the streets. Apprentices felt it in the tremor of their ink lines, reed nibs that once glided now stuttered, as though the very papyrus sensed fault lines opening underfoot. Outside, rumors blew along the canopic way faster than spring pollen, new bishops condemning pagan statuary, magistrates eyeing temple stipends, guilds aligning themselves along brittle creeds. Where once Alexandria had thrummed like an ellipse, many voices held by twin foci of reason and compassion, now subtle fissures crept spider-fine through its wholeness, threatening to scatter every careful curve into lonely shards. The first fracture appeared inside the Hall of Natural Philosophy 2 mornings after Hypatia's lecture. A wooden cubby labeled Chi, Epsilon, Iota, Rho, Omicron, Upsilon, Rho, Gamma, Y, Alpha surgery stood half empty, its crimson twine snipped and scrolls missing. Syrian, notified by a breathless apprentice, hurried to the alcove and discovered a single scrap of parchment left behind. A verse from Isaiah, hastily inked over the Pinake's reference mark in broad, accusatory strokes. That afternoon, another niche, this one housing star charts copied from Babylonian clay tablets, was raided. In its place lay a wax tablet etched with a shaky chiro and the words Fugit Vanitas, vanity flees. The guardians tightened patrols, but nighttime stillness proved a fragile shield. Each dawn they found more gaps, herbal treatises, Pythagorean harmonics, even harmless fables of Aesop spirited away. It seemed as if a phantom librarian stalked the stacks, guided not by curiosity, but by a ledger of disapproval, erasing any scroll whose ink failed some unseen doctrinal test. Within days, a quiet triage formed in the ward of silences, now repurposed from fire damage repair to a sad inventory of subtraction. Apprentices knelt among cedar chests, listing what remained, drawing faint quills through titles lost, on the motions of the heart, lunar eclipses and their portents, the garden poems of Sappho. Each stroke felt like clipping a bird's feather, reducing flight to memory. Yet, amid the tallying, Syrian noticed another trend. Students, who might once have fretted over geometric proofs, now murmured heatedly about doctrine, citing bishops, edicts, and whispered prophecies. Cloister corridors that had carried the scent of ink and jasmine began to thrum with anxious breath, the hush turning brittle. Even the fountain's lulling cadence seemed to falter, as if drops fell less regularly, measuring out a new, uneasy rhythm. Still, learning persisted fragile but alive. The circle of many tongues continued to gather, though benches stood farther apart, and some seats sat conspicuously empty. The stoic Demetrios claimed sudden illness. Benjamin traveled north to visit kin. A Mithraic initiate simply vanished. Those who remained clung to the ritual of the passing lamp, yet voices cracked and questions edged toward challenge rather than invitation. One evening, a young deacon asked whether Earth's roundness, proven by Eratosthenes, contradicted Scripture's four corners. The query was gentle, but tension clenched jaws around the circle. Rabbi Menachem responded with a parable of Jacob's ladder, touching all directions at once, an image of totality rather than geometry. Yet his words drifted like smoke through a room already starved of oxygen. When the alabaster lamp completed its circuit, the flame guttered in a draft none could locate, throwing shadows that wavered like doubt across every frescoed muse. Outside the library, Alexandria's streets mirrored the fragmentation. Processions once vibrant with mixed perfumes of frankincense and myrrh now marched in single sense. Myrrh for the old temples, frankincense for the basilicas. Vendors painted fish symbols or ankhs on stall awnings, signaling allegiance. Sailors chose taverns by the icons scratched on door lintels. Some nights, hymns and hymns collided in the alleys, psalm answering chant in dissonant canon until guardians enforced curfew. The Pharos beam continued its vast, impartial arc, but onshore bonfires lit in zealous vigils cast jumpy red ghosts along the harbor wall, a rival light prone to sudden flare and sudden extinction. In response, Syrian convened the Council of Shelves, chief copyists, guardians, several moderate clerics, a physician, and the widow of a grain merchant who had endowed the herbarium. They met in the map room, unfurling parchment diagrams of the library, as though plotting a new defense. Proposals surfaced, duplicate Atrisk scrolls, and disperse them to satellites at Memphis and Pergamon, disguise certain works behind false catalog labels. Invite the patriarch himself to tour the halls, believing familiarity might breed mercy. But consensus slipped through their fingers like desert sand. Some feared duplicating heretical texts would mark them as complicit. Others argued secrecy betrayed the library's creed of open curiosity. At last, they settled on quiet vigilance, rotate guardians more frequently, pair them with apprentices who could recognize theological intruders, teach night copyists emergency drills to spirit scrolls into concealed alcoves. Above all, keep discussions calm, for panic would fracture shelves faster than any zealot's torch. For a time, the plan held. Guardians learned to read footsteps. Sandals scraping marble at midnight told stories ink could not tand redirected would-be vandals with polite firmness. Copyists stored duplicates inside waterproof amphorae sunk in the herb garden's cisterns, labeling them as lotus bulbs. A small victory came when a Nestorian monk, discovering Ptolemy's Almagest, wept at its elegance and persuaded his brethren to guard rather than purge mathematical texts. Yet victories felt like stitching silk over widening rifts. Whispers reached the council of shelves, certain bishops denouncing Hypatius posthumously as a pagan enchantress, merchants refusing to supply papyrus unless the library purged profane recitations, a rumor that imperial envoys considered confiscating scrolls on military engineering. Every rumor, fact or no, chipped faith the way salt wind gnaws limestone. One damp, blustery evening, a more ominous sign breached the hush. When Carax the cat failed to appear for his customary patrol, a guardian followed faint mules to discover him trapped in a scroll chest, lid secured by a wax seal impressed with the patriarchal ring. The animal was unharmed but terrified, tail puffed and eyes wide as moons. Pinned beneath him lay a decree from the ecclesiastical court forbidding astrological falsehoods and women's heathen devices, their immediate removal to church archives. The message was clear. The library's autonomy, its very breath-faced suffocation by slow legal chords. That night, lamplighters dimmed their flames to half-height, lest bright glow guide unwanted hands to fragile spines. And for the first time since the Caesar fire, a sentinel stood atop the bibliothek roof, scanning alleys for torchlight not friendly. As spring tipped into early summer, Alexandria's divisions sharpened. Yet the library's hush, though riddled with hairline cracks, did not shatter. Guardians still traced doorframe notches each night, murmuring the 9 muses' names. Copyists still aligned paragraphs by moonlight, reed nibs sighing like distant surf. And somewhere in those fragile rituals lived an unspoken resolve that shelves might fragment, scrolls might migrate, but the geometry Hypatia taught the ellipse of shared wonder remained etched in memory's cool basalt, beyond reach of decree or blade. In whispered conclaves, apprentices vowed to carry that curve within them, to lift it, like a bronze mirror, whenever darkness pressed close, reflecting back a gentle arc no dogma could flatten. Thus the library entered its season of fragmented shelves, less brilliant than its golden hush, yet fiercely luminous in subtler ways. For light filtered through cracks can scatter wider than any unbroken beam, turning fissures into prisms. So too did Alexandria's scholars learn to navigate fracture without forsaking harmony, to seal knowledge within hearts, stars, and slip-glazed cups, ready to bloom wherever tolerance next found purchase. And as waves lapped the harbor wall each night, the Pharos lanterns swept its impartial blessing over a city divided, yet dreaming its broad arc, echoing the ellipse inscribed upon Hypatia's black slate, reminding every restless soul that two distant foci can still hold one lovely curve, even when the points between quake and crumble in the hush. Dawn in Alexandria, 7 centuries after Ptolemy's first brick, arrives on muffled camel hooves and the salt-sweet smell of date cakes frying in new conquerors' kettles. It is 641 CE year, 21 of the Hijron. The city stirs. Beneath unfamiliar banners, green silk, stitched with Quranic verses that flutter beside the fading blues of late Roman mosaics. General Amr ibn al-Ji, emissary of the Caliph Umar in distant Medina, walks the limestone quays just as Caesar once paced them, ears attuned not to legionary brass but to the measured cadence of dawn prayer drifting from soldiers' tents. Along the Canopic Way, merchants straighten amphor, temple priests hide cracked idols under rush mats, and a handful of aging grammarians clutch keys to storerooms whose shelves now stand half bare. The library proper fragmented, scorched, dispersed survives, mostly in memory, yet whispers, insist some trove of scrolls still slumbers in side chambers of the old Serapeum, waiting to greet the new age with brittle, ink-perfumed breath. Into this hush slides a story so persistent it will outlive minarets and marble alike, that Caliph Umar, informed of Alexandrian books, decrees them fatefully redundant. If unconcordant with the Koran, they are superfluous. If discordant, they are dangerous. Therefore, feed them to the baths. Lamps, in later centuries, will glow warm over chronicle pages retelling how cartloads of papyrus fueled public hippocausts for 6 entire months. In taverns, from Baghdad to Barcelona, traveling poets will recite the parable by lamplight, each embellishment soft as oud music, flames licking colonnades, steam sighing from marble cisterns, scholars weeping quiet as rain. Yet on this original morning, Umar himself stands weeks of desert and sea away, and no parchment in Medina records such a command. Only the rustle of palm leaves overhead answers Amr's footfalls, and the general's thoughts dwell not on scrolls, but on stable grain taxes and quick repair of aqueducts shattered by siege. Inside the Serapeum annex, a frail deacon named Stephanos unlocks cedar cupboards to reveal maybe a few thousand volumes medical commentaries, Orphic hymns, scraps of Ptolemy's star tables. They are survivors of survivors, patched after Caesar's unintended blaze, hidden during bishop riots, ferried door to door through seasons of creed and counter-creed. Stephanos offers them to the conquerors as ransom for parish safety. Amr's quartermaster, more concerned with parchment's value as ledger paper than as oracle, sets a small guard but otherwise shrugs. The scrolls sleep on, awaiting destiny. Outside, soldiers barter linen for honey. Muezzins chalk prayer times on bathhouse walls. Cat-sever pragmatists skirl atop whichever crate of books happens to sit nearest the sunlit threshold. In that quiet pragmatism lies the truth. The new rulers are busy governing, the old caretakers busy surviving, and neither group possesses tinder for grand symbolic conflagrations. Yet humans, like night birds, see shapes brightest in darkness, lacking clear record. Later generations conjure silhouettes. 600 years after Amer, the Christian polymath Bar Hebraeus pens a Syriac chronicle lamenting lost Greek wisdom and pins blame on Umar's baths. A century later, Al-Kifti, quoting vanished intermediaries, repeats the tale in florid Arabic, adding precise months of bath warming to give the myth an accountant's sheen. By the 13th century, Crusader clergy retell it from pulpits, their voices trembling with both grief and veiled accusation. See how the sword of Islam devoured the lamp of Hellenic reason. Each retelling tightens the string of pathos, plucking our innate fear that one decisive cruelty can ash a millennium's thought in the time it takes to boil a pail of water. Modern excavations uncover a quieter narrative in limestone dust. Wall niches of the Serapeum show chisel marks where statues once stood, long before Amer's tents dotted the hippodrome. Carbonized papyri in Oxyrhynchus pits date to earthquakes and negligence, not caliphal decree. Accounts from contemporaneous Coptic monks mention library remnants carted off as trophy curios, not furnace fodder. Economists calculate that to heat Alexandria's baths, even for a single winter, would require far more scrolls than ever resided in the city after Caesar's blaze. Clay bricks and olive would remain cheaper, cleaner, abundant. Thus, archaeology answers legend not with scorn, but with a gentle shake of the head. The shelves fractured slowly, like beaches eroding grain by grain, their stories leaking into new languages, monasteries, and workshop primers well before any hypothetical torchbearer arrived. Why, then, does the myth endure, glowing ember bright in collective memory? Perhaps because it plays the perfect chord of tragedy and moral, warning each era that ignorance real or rumored is a fire always seeking kindling. It frames history as fragile parchment one careless ruler can ignite, absolving slower culprits. Timidity, termites, budget cuts, shifting trade winds that reroute curiosity eastward. Or perhaps it endures because it offers narrative closure. Humans resist the idea that great things might simply crumble by neglect. A single villain sharpens grief into purpose. Slow entropy only stains it with helplessness. So storytellers gift us the comfort of decisive endings, neat as a seal upon a scroll, even when truth drifts elsewhere like uncollected ashes. A further irony softens the legend's hard edges. The same Islamic civilization alleged to have burned the library soon births the Beit al-Hikmah in Baghdad, where Greek philosophies, Indian numerals, and Persian medicine mingle beneath Abbasid lamps. Umar's supposed contempt becomes untenable. Beside caliphs who sponsor translations of Aristotle and host debates on Galenical humors until dawn. Astronomers like Albatani refine Ptolemy with algebraic tools. Physicians like Ibn Sayyidin quote Hippocrates while distilling his methods through Quranic ethics. In this light, the myth reveals itself less as accusation and more as parable cautioning that knowledge respects no single creed. It migrates, reincarnates, surviving even its mourners. Consider, too, the bathhouse motif. Storytellers picture slaves heaving baskets of scrolls into braziers, steam rising, scented with ink and myrrh. They forget the practicalities. Damp papyrus smolders poorly, soot clogs, hypocaust flues. Linen bindings spit resinous smoke, displeasing to patrons seeking restful soak. More plausible is that occasional scrap served as fire starter, the way any port city repurposes packing straw. From such mundane sparks a legend flares, fed by centuries of longing for dramatic moral calculus that comfort demands culture's corpse. Yet the real baths hummed on olive pit briquettes and driftwood, while scrolls, when truly unwanted, found quieter after lives chewed into cartonnage from mummy masks, shredded for ship-caulking, or reborn as palimpsests where new sermons hid beneath ghostly trigonometry. In the library's surviving alcoves, the guardians keep telling the tale, but in whispers gentle as turning pages. They teach apprentices to weigh legend against evidence like gold dust on a carnelian scale. One pan holds Bar Hebrius's lament, the other holds Abbasid catalogues, thick with once Alexandrian titles. Between rests a feather of matte, reminder that balance not blame best honors memory. Under oil lamps they unroll charred fragments, tracing half-legible ink that leaps centuries to speak again. Each recovered phrase, the heart has chambers, the star returns in cycles. Truth and beauty are circles within circles. Contradicts oblivion, they copy it thrice, once onto papyrus for local shelves, once onto sheepskin for resilience, once into their own inward geometry where no caliph, bishop, or bureaucrat may trespass. So the legend of Umar's fire lingers, an ember passed from campfire to classroom, its glow shaped by every hand that shields or fans it. Whether false, exaggerated, or partly real, it reminds us that libraries burn in many ways, by flame, by apathy, by single stories told too loudly. Against that risk stands another, kinder fire, the light of sane curiosity, Hypatia taught on her final morning. It flickers now in mosaicked corridors, in Abbasid observatories, in slip-glazed cups, scribed with secret verses, and in the quiet of your own listening. As this chapter's lantern dims, breathe easy. Scrolls may crumble, shells may fragment, but the ellipse of wonder redraws itself in every receptive mind, holding distant faith and reason, myth and fact in tender, continuous curve. Rest within that arc, and let its soft geometry guide you onward through the hush. The hush of a desert dawn drapes itself across the sprawling courtyards of 9th century Baghdad, tinting adobe domes a soft apricot and turning the Tigris into molten rose gold. From minaret balconies the first adhan rises, not in thunderous fanfare, but in gently cascading notes that settle over the city like the coo of a well-loved dove. Within the palace district, bronze gates creak open to admit camel caravans newly arrived from the Levant hooves, thunking on packed earth in a rhythm so measured it could soothe even the most sleepless scholar. Draped beneath each saddle hang cedar chests, stamped with fading Alexandrian seals, their sides scarred by salt wind, their interiors perfumed by centuries of ink, myrrh, and hope. The riders dismount, stretch in the pale light, and hand their precious freight to pages of the Beit al-Wikmod, the fabled house of wisdom, whose soft-spun wool cloaks and steady hands echo a lineage of guardians, once patrolling marble aisles beside the Nile. Inside the house of wisdom's grand atrium, silence is neither stern nor sterile, but a living hush, cradling every footfall in velvet, while thousands of suspended lamps cast amber halos upon cedar shelves. Acrobatic beams of morning sun slink through high lattice windows, illuminating motes of dust that twirl like tiny dervishes, each particle a fragment of distant desert, a sliver of parchment ground into silence. perhaps even an atom of hypogeous chalk, still whispering geometry as it flutters. Here, scrolls breathe side by side, with new codices bound in indigo goatskin. Parchment crinkles gently with the climate shifts, creating a soft, percussive layer beneath the distant trickle of courtyard fountains. Scholars in flowing robes of pomegranate and dove-gray glide across mosaic floors, balancing tea trays, astrolabes, reed pens, and blank tablets, eager to receive resurrected lines. At the far end of the atrium stands a freshly arrived chest, its hinges groaning like an old sea captain recounting storms. Al-Hunayn ibn Ishaq, the translator-physician, whose calm bedside voice rivals any lullaby, kneels to open it. The cedar lid lifts, exhaling a sigh of Nile marshes and long-extinguished lamp oil. Inside rest the last 2 books of Galen's on the usefulness of the parts, thought lost since the Serapeum's twilight. Their papyrus edges are frayed, marginalia in Greek, nearly blurred by smoke stains. Yet the core text remains intact, the ink still fragrant, promising new cures for failing hearts and weary lungs. Al-Hunayn's fingers hover as though greeting a timid nightingale. He then coaxes the scrolls onto a padded leather cradle, murmuring a verse from the Koran that honors healing as divine service. Around him, assistants soak fine brushes in rosewater, ready to stabilize the brittle fibers before transcription begins. Meanwhile, in a sun-splashed annex lined with low couches, a young scribe named Layla spreads a cotton cloth embroidered with indigo stars. Upon it, she places a sheet of parchment so thin you could almost read the dawn through it, then dips her reed pen into an ebony black ink ground from soot and fig sap. Her task today is rhythmic and tender, to transcribe the Astronomicon of Hipparchus, recently delivered in fragments from Damascus traders who found them tucked inside a merchant's spice bale. Layla breathes in, sets the tip to the page, and begins tracing Greek letters into freshly minted Arabic curve, smoothed into wind-polished dunes, each diacritic hovering like a desert swallow mid-flight. Around her, fellow scribes copy works of Euclid, Archimedes, and obscure Alexandrian poets, whose odes to moonrise might well be lullabies for an empire. Their pens scratch in unison, soft, steady, sympathetic like reeds swaying beside a slow river. Outside, the caravan courtyard fills with new arrivals. A Persian mathematician bearing cloth sacks of saffron-hued paper. A Nestorian monk ferrying commentary on Aristotle's metaphysics, wrapped in linen. A dark-haired Berber healer offering oral lore of desert herbs, soon to be etched onto palm leaf strips. Each visitor is welcomed with the same gentle choreography. A bow, a cup of cool date milk, a guided path through cypress-shaded corridors to the department most suited to nurture their offering. Even the house's resident cats partake in this ritual, weaving around ankles, inspecting scroll baskets, and ultimately curling atop windowsills, where they can supervise ink as it dries, living seals of quality control that purr approvingly when a line is rendered without blot. Throughout the morning, the compound's harmonies layer like instruments in a tranquil concerto. The copyist's scratch becomes a soft percussion. Older scholars murmuring commentaries supply a droning bass. Courtyard fountains add liquid arpeggios. And overhead, the wind chimes forged from fragments of disused astrolabes tinkle in pentatonic intervals. Every so often, a librarian named Fatima strolls through, her sandals barely whispering over mosaic tesserae as she sprinkles sandalwood smoke to soothe both scroll and scribe. She pauses at Layla's table, admiring the neat columns of bilingual text, and offering a single sugared almond edible semaphore of praise. Layla smiles, cheeks warm, and resumes her steady translation, letting the almond's sweetness linger like a private reward for fidelity to thought. Midday approaches, signaled by a duet of calls, the muezzin's lilting midday adhan echoing across the riverbank, and the low gong that marks the house's communal rest. Work halts not with abrupt clang, but with a gentle diminuendo. Scrolls are rolled shut, pens laid across inkwells like sleeping birds, doors unlatched to let in a whisper of jasmine and cardamom from nearby kitchens. Scholars recline on reed mats beneath date palms, sharing bowls of lentil soup, lime-steeped cucumbers, and honey cakes dusted in crushed pistachio. Conversation drifts from planetary epicycles to the healing virtues of chamomile, then settles on the recent tale of a monk in Antioch who claimed to find bits of Archimedes' screw formula hidden beneath a psalter. Room swells with soft awe rather than rivalry, each listener savoring possibility like the slow melt of honey on the tongue. After the meal, drowsy eyes find respite in the chamber of blue silence, a vaulted room painted lapis from floor to ribbed ceiling, its sole furnishing a central fountain whose droplets plink into a shallow pool shaped exactly like an ellipson. Homage to Hypatia, whispered across centuries. Scribes lie on low couches, and for 30 breaths they practice all Sukan, mindful stillness. Layla traces the curve of the fountain with her gaze and feels tension unspool from her shoulders. In the water's quiet arc, she senses familiar voices, Telemachus cataloging, Syrian guiding, Hypatia tracing chalk in moonlit Alexandria cowing softly, reminding her that every letter she inks is a thread in an endless loom. When the gong chimes again, the restful hush tips seamlessly back into gentle activity, and pens resume their soft psalm. Late afternoon glows amber when Al-Hanain, satisfied with his team's Greek to Arabic draft of Galen, strolls to the astronomical garden perched atop the house's western wall. There he meets Al-Khwarizmi, the mathematician whose quiet grin seems perpetually lit by invisible starshine. Together, they review newly charted revisions of Ptolemy's star tables, recalculated using Indian sign functions introduced just last season. They confer in hushed tones, sliding wooden counting beads like raindrops on bamboo. Below them, the Tigris shimmers, carrying reeds and memory toward Basra and the sea, just as knowledge drifts from script to script, city to city. Their discussion culminates in a moment of silent accord. Al-Khwarizmi nods once, and Al-Hanain marks a small annotation beside a star's recorded latitude, a microscopic pivot that future navigators will rely upon as faithfully as any lighthouse beam. Evening unfurls violet across the sky, and the lamps within the house of wisdom blossom to life, flames wictol, but glass-sheathed, to spare the texts. A hush, thick with contentment, settles over every corridor. Layla stands, stretches, and ties a ribbon of crimson silk through her newly completed choir's no louder accolade needed. She hands the bundle to Fatima, who seals it with a knot of warm wax stamped by the house's emblem, a stylized lamp whose flame curves like a calligraphic Yatta letter that once closed Hypatia's name. In return, Layla receives a clay pendant etched with a tiny ellipse, its 2 foci marked by pinpricks of chalcedony, signifying reason and faith, east and west, memory and imagineering, unbroken curve, luminous in twilight. As stars ignite overhead, the last caravan departs through the cedar gate, bound for Samarkand, with fresh compendia of geometry and medicine stored beside bolts of damask. The camels step into the dune's hush, bells tinkling a lullaby, older than any script yet known. On the parapets, Al-Khwarizmi lifts a polished bronze mirror once destined for Pharos lamp, but now retooled as a sextant sights Vega peaking above the horizon. He sets a small weight upon his astrolabe, his breath steady, shoulders unhurried. Below, in echo of Alexandria's long-ago hush, the house's guardians begin their clockwise rounds, fingertips brushing doorframes, still warm from days' pursuit of wisdom. They whisper the 99 names of God in cycles, just as Alexandrian sentries once uttered the muses, letting each syllable form a custodian's vow. Cats drift behind like silken shadows, tails twitching at the faint rasp of parchment settling for the night. So drifts Baghdad toward midnight, no roaring conquest, no crackle of pyres, just the measured pulse of reed pen and star, mirror and moon, memory and quiet genesis. And somewhere within that cadence, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the faintest echoes of Hypatia's chalk, of Callimachus's catalogues, of countless unnamed voices who once sheltered words beneath charred beams. They murmur through every lamplit corridor, reminding each scribe that knowledge lost can wander back on caravans of kind curiosity, finding new tongues, new alphabets, new lullabies. Let the hush cradle you now, traveler. Outside, the desert wind still carries sand, but inside, the ellipse of wonder spins unbroken, guiding every dreaming mind through the night. Soft, dawn light spills across the Bosphorus like liquid ochre, illuminating the gilded domes of Constantinople's great churches, and glinting off the sea walls where merchant galleys carry cedar chests bound for distant ports. Within the shadowed corridors of the Imperial Library, housed in a former palace chamber, the air carries the faintest perfume of rosewater and aged parchment. Each morning, a slender line of scribes files in under low arches, their sandals whispering against polished marble floors, as they settle behind narrow desks carved with stylized griffins. Before them lie stacks of codices, Arabic translations of Ptolemy's star tables, Latin renderings of Aristotle's Ethics, and fragments of Hippocratic treatises once transcribed by Baghdad's translators. A single oil lamp glows on each bench, its flame dancing as if eager to illuminate new wonders. Here, in this hushed sanctuary perched between Europe and Asia, the light of classical knowledge flickers back to life, each scribal scratch a gentle reaffirmation that wisdom refuses to remain hidden beneath sand or water. Within the library's vaulted scriptorium, antiseptic echoes mingle with hushed Latin prayers recited by resident monks. The walls, once frescoed with imperial triumphs, now bear rosettes framing Greek versessa, testament to emperors. Quiet support for learned men who preserve scrolls rather than march armies. Senior scribes, their robes dyed in soft hues of saffron and cerulean, lean over their work with careful breath control, dipping quills into oak gall ink whose temps lingers faintly in the air. Nearby, apprentices absorb these motions like pupils at a master's bedside, memorizing letter forms that arc across vellum in perfectly measured curves. When a page is complete, it is lifted onto a felt-lined tray and carried in reverent procession to binders who fold linen-lined boards around text, stitching signatures with beeswax-coated thread. The only sound beyond stylus on vellum is the distant call of seagulls, their cry softened by stone, reminding scholars that knowledge, once transplanted, thrives best when nourished by both land and water. As centuries pass, the city's learned households emulate the imperial example. Wealthy patricians commission private libraries, lining dark oak shelves with Byzantium's most prized manuscripts. Curtains of damask in deep crimson filter sunlight, turning each beam into muted ruby that falls upon carefully arranged volumes. In one such study, a polished bronze inkwell, shaped like a sea-bound trireme, steams faintly with tincture of lavender. A scholar named Michael Sellos, head librarian to the emperor, paces beneath a row of scroll-studded cases, pausing to finger the spines of treatises on rhetoric and medicine, recalling that each codex carries not merely ink, but the breath of its scribe. When he speaks, his voice trades loud proclamations for soft reflections on human virtue and divine order, his listeners leaning forward as though drawn by a gentle magnet. In the hush, the past feels palpably present, voices of Greek ancestors echoing through written word, reborn in Byzantium's mosaic halls. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 casts a shadow that initially dims these corridors of learning. Yet out of that darkness emerges a delicate silver of renewal. Greek scholars, bearing precious scrolls hidden in their cloaks, flee westward across the Adriatic. Venetian gondolas glide under moonlight to Venetia's quays, each boat carrying codices once housed behind gilded panels, now destined for new patrons. Around a lacquered oaken table, humanists like Marsilio Ficino and Angelo Poliziano pore over Greek psalms and Platonic dialogues, translating them into the fluid cadences of Latin and Italian. Their quills scratch in unison, conjuring classical philosophy as though awakening a sleeping spirit. All the while, Katsever the library's silent companions patrol velvet-upholstered benches, ensuring that every inked syllable remains free from nocturnal nibbling. Beyond princely courts, the printing press arrives like whispered revolution. Gutenberg's movable typeset, first practiced in Mainz, but perfected by Venetian workshops, transforms fragile manuscripts into printed folios, each page stamped with identical uniformity. In softly lit print houses, compositors arrange tiny metal letters within wooden frames, their fingertips tracing lines of composed text as if reading Braille. When the final proof is ready, a monk-like pressman rolls dampened linen over the form, pressing pages one by one until the ink transfers in silent, even pressure. The hiss of damp cloth, the thump of platen settling, the soft creak of screw threads all combine into a soothing machinery hum that sustains night-long labors. Printers speak in low voices, no louder than a scholar's whisper-testing type alignments and tweaking kerning with feathered brushes. When a sheet emerges flawless, it is draped across wooden stakes to dry, amber light filtering through paper pulp and casting faint cartographic outlines on workshop walls. Meanwhile, in the basilicas of Paris and Oxford, university scholars embrace the printed word as a gentle companion to handwritten treasure. At twilight, they huddle around long trestle tables, strewn with both codices and quartos. Candle wicks trimmed low so shadows dance at book edges rather than across faces. A student from Naples holds an early edition of Cicero's letters, finger-tracking Latin rhetoric whose lived cadences he rehearses in subdued murmurs. By the time dawn redeems Europe again, the Renaissance is in full bloom, an intellectual garden, planted with seeds of Hellenic lore, irrigated by Arabic numerals and Jewish commentaries, and nurtured through printing's calm revolution. Medici libraries bristle with tomes on anatomy, perspective, and astronomy, the margins filled with artists' sketches of human proportions and mapmakers' pencil-drawn longitude lines. In teaching hospitals of Padua, students draw live cadavers under whispered instruction, the quiet drip of perfumed water from stone basins punctuating anatomical lectures. In softly lit astronomical towers, lenses ground from Venetian glass refract starlight into slivers of curve, recalling hypothious conics even as they chart new celestial motions. Everywhere, the classical whisper spoken in Alexandria eventually becomes the clarion call of modern science, art, and humanism. And yet, amid this flowering, the hush remains the same gentle undercurrent reminder that knowledge spreads not with trumpets, but with quiet perseverance. Whether in scriptoriums, humming with quills, print shops worry with presses, or stadioli aglow with candlelight, the transmission of ideas thrives on measured breath, steady hands, and respectful hush. The great libraries of Byzantium and the Renaissance palazzi serve as guardians of a continuity begun centuries earlier along the Nile. Here, in the low murmur of turning pages and the soft exhale of satisfied readers, the arc of human curiosity bends neither to conquest nor to neglect, but to the subtle, unending curve of wonder. Before dawn's gentle light reaches the ancient breakwater, research vessels drift over a silent, underwater city where limestone colonnades and marble statues lie half-buried in fine Nile silt. Each morning, as the eastern harbor's surface shimmers with pale gold, a team of archaeologists and conservators prepares descent into the glassy depths, their breaths muffled through regulators, their movements deliberate and hushed. On deck, technicians monitor sonar feedback and gently adjust the submersible's thrusters, careful not to stir the silt that has cradled fragile jars for centuries. Below, the ruins of Alexandria's submerged quays and warehouses spread like a ghostly map, corridors of cartonnage and urns whispering the library's lost legacy. In this serene realm of coral-smeared stone and drifting sand, the unrolling of a single papyrus fragment becomes an act of revival, soft as unwrapping a delicate seedling from its protective husk, promising new life for words thought forever swallowed by the sea. Their lights, diffused by murky water, reveal glimpses of amphorae still sealed against intrusion and wooden beams cloaked in marine growth. Each jar encountered is coaxed free of its sedimentary cradle with feather-light strokes and gloved hands, so steady they seem guided by invisible lullabies. When a jar is lifted toward the surface, tiny bubbles escape in slow motion, dance beneath the divers' helmets, as if the ocean itself exhales in anticipation of rediscovered memory. Above, cranes swing the artifact gently onto deck, where it will spend hours immersed in brine baths to ease its shock from salty depths. A patient, silent transition before new life on terra firma. Conservators unseal each jar and let briny water pool in shallow trays lined with cushioned supports. In the workshop's gentle hush, papyrus rolls emerge from their ceramic cages like newborns blinking at pale overhead lights. A conservator named Miriam moves with tender precision, placing each roll onto a porous cloth atop a bed of humidified moss. As moisture seeps into brittle fibers, the scrolls begin to relax, unfurling in faint resistance until they lie nearly flat, whisper-soft, under glass weights. Every motion is accompanied by a hush of wonder and relief, as though both diver and scholar share a sacred breath. Across the room, ink stains reveal themselves in faint brown constellations, the long submerged hieroglyphs, Greek letters, and Latin script reawakening from a centuries-long dream beneath the waves. Their voices so low they could be mistaken for the distant roll of surf. One by one, they begin to map the faded ink strokes, illuminating lines of text that speak of daily life botanical remedies, and philosophical musings, lost to memory's tide. The smallest scrap of frayed edge, bearing 3 letters, can transform our understanding of an entire treatise. An exclamation of delight echoes, muted by protective masks, when a column of complete verses appears, an unknown author's elegy on the death of a beloved teacher. Each newly revealed word is transcribed onto acid-free paper, its edges annotated with GPS coordinates and water depth, ensuring future scholars can trace the fragment's submerged provenance. As the unrolling continues, a broader pattern emerges, not merely random remnants. Maps reconstructed from jar locations suggest these rooms were part of a secondary archive and insurance vault for the library's most precious scrolls. Underwater surveyors use photogrammetry to stitch together 3-dimensional mosaics of collapsed walls and fallen columns, revealing shelves still clinging to their coping stones. In a hushed gallery room, researchers pore over 3D prints of submerged shelf segments, each miniature model scaled so that scientists can annotate missing sections and plan future dives. Meanwhile, marine biologists assigned to the project study the very organisms that cradled the jars in their coral embrace. Barnacles, bryozoans, and sponges adhere to pottery surfaces like living tapestries. When removed with microscalpels, they leave behind microscopic traces that reveal fluctuating sea levels and water chemistry over centuries. A graduate student carefully lifts a bryozoan record that, when carbon dated, suggests a major earthquake around the 1st century BCIA seismic event that likely cracked aqueducts and prompted early officials to relocate scrolls to safer inland vaults. In hushed wonder, scholars connect these geological events with recorded fires and sackings of Alexandria, weaving into the narrative a delicate interplay of nature and empire, of sand, stone, and ink. Late afternoon light filters through porthole windows where simulation tanks, diffusing glare and lending an almost garden-like serenity to the underwater workspace. Here, trainee divers learn to recognize subtle relief in pottery profiles, to adjust buoyancy so gentle that even the gloomiest corners of a collapsed vault remain undisturbed. They whisper to one another in a soft patois of technical terms: tactile sweep, silt curtain, pressure equalization. Their voices an intimate chord within the tank's greenish hush. As twilight closes the day above the harbor, the recovered texts move into climate-controlled rooms, where a gentle cycle of warm mist and dry air gradually replaces saline with purified moisture. Here, the hush deepens to a reverent stillness. Lamplights are dimmed footstep mufflers placed on thresholds, and doors latched to seal out the bustle of the modern quay. Scrolls rest in custom-built frames, their edges cushioned by folded acid-free tissue, and are monitored by digital sensors that track humidity, temperature, and minute fractures. When a conservator notes a subtle crease or color shift, the text is gently rehoused, the entire archive breathing as a living organism tended with near-parental care. The last jar of the day is secured in its wet tray, while the diver's sentry stands at the rail, gazing out at the lighthouse's beam sweeping across the waves. He carries within him the hush of the deep knowledge of silent corridors and buried words that now glide across lab tables thousands of years removed from their cradle. Below him, the water holds its secret vigil, the broken columns and amphorae waiting patiently for tomorrow's light. And in the scholar's chest, there pulses a gentle anticipation, a promise that every jar unsealed, every papyrus unfurled, is a new verse in Alexandria's enduring lullabian underwater echo of pages turned, guiding us softly back through the hush to cradle restless minds in the gentle reassurance that human memory, once submerged, can rise again. The hush of night settles over Alexandria like a silken veil, softening every edge of stone and sea. Above, constellations wheel in their timeless arcs, pinpricks of gentle illumination against an ink-blue sky. Within the library's great reading hall, folded scrolls rest in cedar racks, scented faintly of myrrh and lotus, their words breathing softly in the cool air. Lanterns trimmed low-spill pools of golden light onto polished mosaic floors, where the patterns of waves and star spirals trace a silent symphony. In this final hour, the world feels woven together by a single, unbroken thread, the promise that every story preserved here carries the gentle echo of 1,000 hearts, cradled beneath the canopy of night. As your eyes grow heavy, each chapter of this city's lore has layered one hush upon another, building a cathedral of soft sound where stone sighs join the murmur of turning pages. Here, memory and moment converge. Hypatia's chalked conics still shimmer in moonlit dreams. Calamacuse's catalog numbers remain etched like lullabies upon cedar shelves. The distant ruins, shattered columns, whisper tales of resilience. In this collective resonance, you may feel the heartbeat of humanity steady, tender, and unceasing as it pulses through every scroll, every footstep, every drop of ink seeking permanence against the tide of time. Libraries matter because they are the fragile vessels of our shared consciousness. These silent rooms, seemingly still, carry the lively echoes of philosophers, poets, and physicians who once dared to unroll their questions before the blank expanse of papyrus. They remind us that ideas, like seeds, need gentle nurturing, the rhythmic drip of water clocks, the cautious hush of guardians, the steadfast pulse of nightly vigils, to bloom into the knowledge that shapes civilizations. If a single scroll is lost, a whisper of insight vanishes. If an entire archive falls silent, an entire worldview risks slipping beneath oblivion's surface. Yet through patient rescue and careful renewal, Alexandria's legacy endures, offering quiet reassurance that even the most ephemeral thoughts may be cradled into eternity. Across centuries and continents, the arc of learning has bent toward preservation rather than destruction. Compassionate custodians answered with double care, copying, translating, concealing, and reawakening ideas wherever refuge could be found. From Baghdad's House of Wisdom to Byzantium's imperial studioli, from Renaissance print shops to modern labs unearthing submerged archives, each generation has honored the vow to keep inquiry alive under hush. In so doing, they forged an unbroken chain, a relay passing the torch of curiosity from one hand to the next, never allowing its glow to dim entirely. As you settle deeper into these calm reflections, feel this chain encircle you, a living embrace of minds across time, inviting you to become a link in that gentle, enduring circle. Memory itself is both fragile and resolute, like papyrus fibers pressed beneath the sea, only to unfurl again in daylight. It is the whispered verse that awakens when you close your eyes, the half-remembered melody that drifts beneath your breath, the line of poetry that surfaces unbidden as dusk yields to dawn. In libraries, memory takes shape in neat rows of labeled cubbies, but it also thrives in the quiet between shelves, where imagination wanders. Each recovered phrase, each carefully bound volume, carries the dual promise that nothing is truly lost when hearts and hands choose to remember, and that remembrance, in turn, fosters hope. In this moment, let your own memories settle like gentle lantern light, the laughter of friends, the pages of a beloved story, the hush of a nighttime breeze, each a murmured echo of the great library above the waves. Shared stories unite us across every gulf of language, geography, and even belief. An astrolabe's star map guides mariners and astronomers alike, translating celestial whispers into navigational certainty. When you read a tale handed down through centuries, you touch the hand of its teller, feel the heartbeat of its world, and partake in a promise that your own voice may one day join the chorus. In the hush of Alexandria's halls, such universality takes on sacred meaning, each scroll a vessel not only of knowledge but of empathy, a gentle reminder that beneath our many foci science, faith, art lies a single unifying wonder at the world's quiet mysteries. Empires rise and fall, libraries burn or sink, yet the impulse to record, to preserve, to teach survives in the soft murmur of every new hand tracing ink across empty fiber. Consider the scribes who labored by candlelight, their voices hushed by conviction that tomorrow's reader would be grateful. The divers who retrieve waterlogged fragments with patient breath, knowing each flake of ink is priceless. The modern scholars decoding faded letters with microscopes, each an unheralded guardian of memory's flame. Now, as your lids grow heavy and breaths lengthen, imagine settling beneath the library's dome, reclining on a cushioned bench, warmed by the faint hum of ancient lamps. In the distance, a lone lute is plucked in the moonlit courtyard, its notes drifting like ripples across the water's glassy face. Every sound water dripping from a fountain, pages rustling in cedar racks. A cat's soft pad along mosaic tile conspires to cradle your mind in restful lullaby. Let the library's hush become your own, a comforting cocoon in which thoughts slow and worries dissolve, replaced by serene curiosity and the promise of gentle dreams. Sleep now, dear listener, and carry these reflections into your rest. Know that each book borne on camel, each scroll retrieved from shipwreck, each line copied by trembling quill, exists because someone cared enough to protect the spark of human wonder. As you drift, imagine voyages of thought spanning deserts, oceans, and centuries, guided by beacons of stone and fire. Feel the lull of waves against Alexandria's shore, merging with your own breathing, each inhale and exhale harmonizing with the city's heartbeat, steady, ancient, and sublime. And when morning finds you renewed, recall this night's soft voyage beneath the stars. Walk forward with the quiet assurance that libraries matter not only as repositories of facts, but as sanctuaries for fragile hopes. Carry with you the knowledge that even the most delicate whisper, once enshrined in caring silence, can resonate across time and space, echoing in every heart poised to listen. Rest easy, for the hush holds you gently, a final promise that the flame of curiosity, once kindled, can never be fully extinguished, but will shine on, ever guiding, ever comforting, like waves lapping softly against Alexandria's ancient, welcoming shore.